Game of Thrones. This night needs more money. Chapter 1. Fool commoner, how dare you secretly count the apples on Sir Finn's tree? You must be trying to steal them. I've been wronged, my lord. As everyone knows, I can't even count. Nonsense. Still defiant, I'll whip you 5 times as punishment. Crack, 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 crack. Ah tilde wait, my lord, that's already the 6th. Ha! You cunning fellow, and you say you can't count. As soon as he finished speaking, another round of whipping sounds echoed. After beating him for a good while, until the other party passed out, the farm steward finally put down the whip, satisfied. Hang this fellow up for me, so all those ungrateful commoners can get a good look. Yes. Where the hell am I? Dazed, Corleone slowly woke up, feeling an intense pain in his head and body. He only remembered finally enduring 8 years of combined bachelor's and master's degrees, having just obtained his medical license, and was about to reach the pinnacle of his life. Unexpectedly, on his first day in the outpatient clinic, an out-of-control 100-ton truck crashed straight in. Shaking his head, a memory that didn't belong to him flooded his mind. Riverlands, picking apples, collecting copper coins, visiting brothels. I've transmigrated to the evil Middle Ages. Opening his swollen eyelids, Corleone cursed silently, then lifted his head to find his hands tightly bound, hanging high from an apple tree. With his master's degree in surgery, he could naturally assess that he had sustained at least dozens of external injuries of varying degrees, making him repeatedly gasp in pain. Looking around, a dozen or so people in ragged, patched clothes, men and women, stood sparsely below, pointing and gesticulating at him. That hateful Corleone. Sir Finn providing us work is a great kindness, yet this fellow not only isn't grateful, but even tried to steal the Lord's apples. Exactly. If we anger the Lord and our wages for this month are deducted, we'll all starve. May the stranger take him and appease Sir Finn's wrath. May the mother be merciful and bless the apple harvest in the Lord's lands. That's right, it must be because of maggots like Corleone that the last batch of apples was so sour and bitter, and the harvest was poor, making young Master Derek thin. It pained my heart so much. Everyone work hard, strive to make the young master plump and healthy, and repay Sir Finn's kindness. Oh ho ho. With a fervent cheer, the farmhands excitedly dispersed and returned to their diligent labor. From beginning to end, not a single person expressed an ounce of sympathy for Corleone's plight. You motherfooler. The numbness of the crowd chilled Corleone to the core, but his weakness prevented him from shouting, only managing to open his mouth and let out, ho. Ho. These ignorant fools. By the 7, the original owner absolutely had no intention of stealing, he was just standing under the tree counting them for fun. Moreover, the Sir Finn they spoke of was no good person at all, but a lord so stingy he was beyond compare. A strong laborer like Corleone earned only 91 copper coins a month, which was less than 2 silver stags. And this was under conditions of working over 14 hours a day, without any holidays. Even in the fertile riverlands, this meager sum was only enough for Corleone to eat nearly moldy black bread and a small bowl of watery gruel every day. Despite this, the original owner, even without eating, would save up every 6 months to visit a brothel, a testament to his rare willpower. Kindness. To hell with kindness. But no matter how angry Corleone was, he knew very well that trying to explain the class struggle between landlords and farmers to these exploited farmhands was like casting pearls before swine. He simply adjusted his breathing, hoping to regain some strength to properly think about how to survive in this utterly feudal world. Just then, a translucent phantom suddenly appeared before him. Name: Corleone. Profession: doctor. Skill: surgical operation LV2. Current available skill draws: 0. Please note, draw attempts can be obtained through top-ups. Specific rules are: LV1 Apprentice 10 Gold Dragons Attempt. LV2 Veteran 100 Gold Dragons Attempt. LV3 Expert 1000 Gold Dragons Attempt. LV4 Master 10,000 Gold Dragons Attempt. LV5 Grandmaster 1 million Gold Dragons Attempt. Golden Finger. Corleone's eyes lit up, then immediately dimmed. Even the lowest apprentice level draw cost 10 gold dragons. Where was he, a poor farmer, going to get that much money? What did 10 gold dragons mean? With his monthly wage of 91 copper coins, even if he didn't eat or drink, he would have to work for over 100 years. And for every level increase, the gold dragons required for a draw increased tenfold. From LV4 to LV5 it even jumped 100-fold, requiring 1 million gold dragons. This was absolutely ridiculous. This practically meant that Corleone, working tirelessly from when humans were still monkeys until the 21st century, still wouldn't be able to gather that much money. Isn't this driving me to my death? You motherfooling dog system. Ding tilde tilde detecting host's first system activation, granting one free no-level draw. Godfather. Bro admits his voice was a bit too loud just now. There were many people outside, so bro will kowtow to you. Activate draw. Corleone silently chanted, and then the system panel began to rapidly transform, a pile of colorful cards fluttering before his eyes. After a while, a dazzling Corleone saw a multicolored black card appear before him. Skill, Fate's Gamble, no level, cannot be upgraded. Your pocket always contains a gold dragon that cannot be used as currency. When your enemy attacks you, you can forcefully activate Fate's Gamble with it. If the opponent chooses to continue attacking, you will 100% negate the next instance of damage and gain the right to execute them. Cooldown, 7 days. Clip. Clop. Clip. Clop. Just as Corleone was concentrating on studying his golden finger, a rapid hoofbeat approached from afar. They made a lot of noise, letting their horses trample freely through the fields, crushing many wheat ears. Clearly, they were not friendly. What are you looking at? Get back to work. Seeing all the farmhands looking their way, the farm steward who had beaten Corleone earlier shouted loudly, then took 2 of his subordinates to meet them. Stop, knights, this is Sir Finn's land. Please restrain your horses, don't trample the crops in the fields. Woe tilde tilde. His shouts seemed to work. The leader, after crossing the fields with his group, reined in his horse and stopped not far in front of him. The leader was a tall, thin man with a goatee, wearing a necklace made of strung coins around his neck. His mount was quite striking, actually a zebra with black and white stripes. Corleone, hanging from the tree, saw it clearly and couldn't help but be surprised, as zebras are naturally fierce, and even in his previous life, there was virtually no possibility of taming them. Under everyone's gaze, he lightly squeezed his horse's flanks, swaying step by step until he reached the steward, his expression flippant. Only one of his ears was wrapped in gauze, still seemingly oozing blood, making him look a bit comical. Apologies, my men are not very polite. We were just thirsty from traveling and came to ask for some apples. After looking around for a moment, the tall, thin man grinned. Sir Finn, right. I've heard his name before. Who does he pledge allegiance to, again? Lord Edmure Tully, my lord. Seeing that the newcomer's tone was relatively calm, the steward breathed a slight sigh of relief, but didn't completely relax his guard, adding, the apples aren't ripe yet. After all, the group of more than 10 people all looked fierce and didn't seem like easy people to deal with. Hearing the steward's reply, the man's smile grew even brighter, and he deliberately said loudly, oh. It seems I remembered correctly. We are knights loyal to Roose Bolton, under the command of His Majesty Robb Stark, the king in the north, to capture the Kingslayer Jaime Lannister and return him to Riverrun. His voice was loud, and Corleone, hanging not far away, heard it clearly. His heart immediately sank. Roose Bolton, Robb Stark, Jaime Lannister. These names were all too familiar to him. Earlier, due to having just transmigrated, he hadn't given it much thought. Now it seemed he had transmigrated into the world of A Song of Ice and Fire. If he was not mistaken, it should still be during the War of the Five Kings. Indeed, before Corleone could fully process it, the tall, thin man waved his hand, signaling a few of his subordinates to spread out, revealing 2 people tightly bound together on the back of a horse behind them. One of them was wearing armor, tall, with a round, rough face and wide blue eyes, as if perpetually filled with rage, but it was vaguely discernible that she was a woman. The other, however, was very thin, with his head bowed in a dejected manner. His dirty, long hair made him look exactly like a wounded lion. Most importantly, a rope hung around his neck, and the pendant on the rope was not jewelry or an ornament, but a severed hand. Jaime Lannister. Tywin Lannister's eldest son, a Kingsguard, the Kingslayer, an expert in seducing his sister. In short, if that guy really was Jaime Lannister with one hand cut off, then the one tied with him was most likely, Beauty, Brienne of Tarth. And the leader of this knightly order. My name is, Iron Leg, Worden, sir. The man astride the dappled horse continued with a smile, everyone loyal to the king in the north knows me. I am Lord Bolton's captain of the guard. Hello, Sir Worden. Hearing that the other party was on his lord's side, the steward finally completely relaxed his guard. After all, the Kingslayer's iconic golden hair was too conspicuous, even covered in mud, it was still perfectly recognizable. However, he still emphasized, but I regret to say, sir, the apples aren't ripe yet, but we can offer you and your men some food and water. Shadowcats have been frequently sighted nearby these days, and traveling at night might not be safe. You'd best set off as soon as possible. The steward was very experienced. Having managed property for a landed knight for over a decade, he believed he could handle these outsiders well. A bunch of northern barbarians coming south to fight meant they would surely take what they could, but as allies, they shouldn't go too far. The war had lasted over a year, and Sir Finn had also been conscripted by Lord Edmure to Riverrun. He had to guard the property well for his lord. Sure enough, when he heard that they could provide food and water, Sir Worden showed a satisfied smile on his face. Excellent. I told you, Sir Finn is a very generous man. We'll rest here tonight and set off tomorrow. He turned his head and shouted to those behind him, eliciting a chorus of strange cries and cheers from his men. The group excitedly marched towards the center of the farm, completely ignoring the steward's increasingly dark expression. These ruffians. The steward cursed inwardly. He had only intended to give them some hardtack to send them on their way, but he hadn't expected these fellows to take advantage and want to spend the night indoors. He wanted to stop them, but seeing over a dozen fully armed men, and only 2 guards on his side. Plus, this farm was surrounded by orchards, at least 5 miles from Sir Finn's castle, with no time to call for reinforcements. He could only watch as they streamed in. Go, first escort young Master Derek back to the castle, quietly, and make sure these northerners don't discover him. I shouldn't have agreed to bring him to the farm today. Gritting his teeth, the steward turned his head and whispered instructions to a guard beside him. Hearing this, the guard nodded and turned to walk towards a wooden house. However, just as the group passed the steward and his 2 guards, Corleone, from his high vantage point, noticed that Worden, who was leading, suddenly raised his fist and made a gesture. No. He is not Iron Leg, Worden. Corleone frantically recalled the plot he had seen in his previous life and his eyes widened instantly. That guy is. Before he could react, as the man's gesture fell, the group, which had been dutifully advancing, suddenly drew their weapons and, without warning, slashed at the steward and the guard beside him. It all happened too suddenly. The steward's impatient expression hadn't even faded before he and the guard were both cut across the throat and fell to the ground. At the same time, the group scattered rapidly with incredible coordination. The guard who had just run out heard the commotion behind him. The moment he turned around, his head was smashed by a morning star. The others, meanwhile, galloped into the orchard, wantonly chasing and killing all the hired laborers. What are you doing, Vargo Hoat? Such behavior immediately caused Brienne to roar in anger. Overwhelmed with a sense of justice, she could not believe that these guys were so deranged. He already agreed to provide you with food and water. You both serve the king in the north. Why are you slaughtering these innocent people? Shut up, fool. Brienne's reply was a merciless punch to her face. Falling from her horse, her already dirty armor was stained with mud again, and Jaime, who was tied with her, also fell. The man who had earlier called himself Worden, and was now called Vargo Hoat by Brienne, dismounted and repeatedly kicked both of them, his curses incessant. If your lord father doesn't give me a mountain of sapphires as ransom, I'll have every soldier in Harrenhal line up to have their way with you. He stopped after several kicks. Remounting his horse, he trod heavily on the steward's corpse as he rode towards the orchard, laughing arrogantly. I am the lord of Harrenhal. The lord said he wants apples, so he's going to get those fool apples today. Corleone, hanging from the tree, watched the scene below. Shouts and screams continuously echoed from the woods, filling his heart with anxiety. It was exactly as he remembered from his memory. That guy was not Roose Bolton's captain of the guard at all, but the infamous leader of the warriors group, Vargo Hoat. And his subordinates were all vicious bandits. In the early stages of the War of the Five Kings, this fellow was first taken in by Lord Tywin Lannister, then betrayed his employer, and instead pledged allegiance to Robb Stark, the king in the north, offering Harrenhal, and was thus made Lord of Harrenhal. But as the saying goes, a leopard cannot change its spots. Although he had gained a title and lands, at heart, he was still a complete and utter bandit. It's over. Targeted by these guys, not a single soul on the farm would be left alive, including himself. Although that system skill was useful, it could only be used once every 7 days, and there were over a dozen of them. Just as Corleone was anxiously pondering how to break free, he saw Vargo Hoat pluck an apple from a tree, having already spotted him, and ride his dappled horse directly towards him. He struggled frantically, but the ropes on his hands were tied too tightly, making it impossible to break free. He could only watch helplessly as the other party approached him. "Look what I found." His tone was exaggerated. He looked up at Corleone, as if he had discovered something very interesting, and shouted, "A roasted suckling pig." Hearing this, 2 warriors group members nearby also rode their horses closer, circling Corleone slowly, observing him with interest. "Looks like a fellow who made a mistake." One of them joked, "His skin is quite fair, just a bit old. Otherwise, Ert would be very interested in this boy." The other also chimed in, "Save it, that freak Ert only loves young ones. He doesn't even bother to look at anyone over 12. They say it's a habit he picked up when he was a monk in the church." Hearing this, the man nodded and casually drew a dagger from his saddle. "Looks like this kid is useless, just kill him." As he spoke, he moved to strike, and Vargo Hoat and the other 2 showed no intention of stopping him. Or rather, they had already planned to silence everyone from the very beginning of their actions. Corleone was burning with anxiety, ready to fight to the death, planning to activate his skill to kill one first, when Vargo Hoat tilted his head, revealing his bandaged ear. He immediately reacted and shouted loudly. Wait! I am a healer, my lord, I can treat your ear." However, Vargo Hoat paid no heed. In his eyes, Corleone's words were merely a last struggle before death. When faced with death, people could utter any shameful lie. He had seen it too many times over the years. Seeing the dagger getting closer, Corleone didn't care about anything else and loudly shouted directly, "Your ear is already festering. If you don't disinfect it soon, you'll definitely get a high fever, and it could kill you within 2 days." As Corleone urgently shouted, the dagger was already within reach. Just as he was about to activate his skill, a white flash appeared before his eyes, followed by a clang, and the assailant's dagger fell to the ground. "You'd better not be lying to me, boy." Vargo Hoat did not sheath his longsword. Instead, he grinned, rode forward, and threatened Corleone by pressing the sharp tip of his sword against his stomach. "Otherwise, I'll make Ert make an exception." "Of course, my lord." Hearing this, Corleone finally breathed a sigh of relief and immediately vowed, "I swear by the 7 gods, if I cannot cure your ear, I shall fall into the 7 hells." "No need for your oath." Vargo Hoat sheathed his blade, took a bite of the apple, and mumbled, "If you fail, I'll personally send you to hell, ha 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 ha." He laughed and chewed a couple of times, juice flowing down his beard from his mouth. Suddenly, his expression changed, and he violently spat the chewed apple pulp onto the ground. "Pa! It's still godful unripe." Corleone's words, indeed, proved to be spoken too soon. When he ripped off the gauze covering Vargo Hoat's ear, the sight before him made his head spin. It was quite outrageous. How outrageous was it? Put it this way, his ear looked like it had been completely torn off by some beast, yet he had brutally stuck it back on and, what's more, wrapped it tightly with gauze. Looking at the severely infected, festering, and blackened remnant of an ear, Corleone felt his stomach churn, but he forced himself to use his solid professional knowledge to assess the situation. The blood supply to the avulso-auricular cartilage was almost completely cut off. Forcibly reattaching it only turned it into a piece of necrotic foreign matter pressed against the wound, perfectly blocking the drainage of pus and creating a sealed bacterial culture dish. This was a classic case of post-traumatic tissue necrosis complicated by severe infection. This was a textbook-level error in treatment, and the consequences were far more serious than simply losing an ear. Wasn't this just asking for death? Although Corleone wished this brutal fellow would die sooner rather than later, If he actually did die, Corleone figured he wouldn't live much longer either. After all, the man's subordinates were brandishing gleaming swords right under his nose. What are you staring at? Hurry up and start, boy. Seeing Corleone hesitate, the skinny man wielding a short blade beside him grew visibly impatient and urged him on irritably. During their earlier conversation, Corleone had learned this man was Urswick, the second in command of the brave companions. My lord. Corleone forced himself to remain calm and explained steadily, the situation is very serious, my lord. The ear you pressed back on is already necrotic. It must be completely removed immediately, along with all the rotten flesh, otherwise the pus will enter the bloodstream and cause a high fever. Before Corleone could finish, Vargo furiously pointed at Brienne nearby and cursed, you fool whore, you bit off my ear. I'm going to cut off your ears and shove them into your ugly cunt. Ha ha. Brienne showed no fear in the face of Vargo's threats, scoffing, that is the punishment a maiden deals to one who attempts to violate her honor. Her mockery enraged Vargo further. He stood up and launched into a flurry of punches and kicks directed at Brienne. Despite his companion's plight, Jaime, who was nearby, remained motionless, his head still bowed, lost in thought. Witnessing this scene, Corleone deduced what might have happened between Brienne and Vargo earlier, and he couldn't help but feel a pang of emotion. This commander of the brave companions was truly ravenous, he'd eat anything. However, it seemed he hadn't succeeded, otherwise, given Vargo's nature, Brienne wouldn't be wearing armor right now. No, it was more likely she wouldn't be wearing anything at all. After beating her for a while, Vargo's anger subsided somewhat. He turned, sat down heavily opposite Corleone, and fixed him with a threatening stare, you better know what you're doing, boy. Don't worry, my lord, I am confident. Corleone guaranteed it with conviction, but inwardly, he had no confidence at all. Having studied medicine for 8 years straight through undergraduate and graduate school, followed by residency rotations, he had participated in debridement and suturing and had served as an assistant, but independently handling this level of infection and tissue adhesion, especially under such appalling surgical conditions. Never mind him, even his mentor would probably be stumped. I need hot water. Whether he could successfully treat the fellow was irrelevant, the important thing was to bluff his way through and ensure his own survival first. Without hesitation, he turned and loudly commanded the brave companions members, boiling hot water. Clean cloth boiled in that water. Salt, honey, an oil lamp, and a sharp knife or dagger. And try to find some spiderwebs or clean moss. Corleone's sudden orders confused the men, but Vargo grinned at his subordinates, who were about to protest, do as he says. The way this boy talks reminds me of Qyburn. About half an hour later. Inside the wooden hut, only the sounds of sizzle and snip, snip could be heard continuously. Corleone was fully focused, quickly cutting away the rotten flesh on Vargo's ear with the red-hot blade. This was not an ideal instrument, but it provided basic sterilization and hemostasis. The small knife severed the adhered fibers while simultaneously cauterizing the blood vessels. His movements were extremely cautious, ensuring he did not tear the most vascularized area at the base of the auricle and cause massive bleeding. Because if anything went wrong during the procedure, the two brave companions members nearby would certainly hack him to pieces. Vargo Hote, who was undergoing the procedure, remained motionless. Of course, this wasn't because he was a tough man, it was because, right from the start of the operation, the fellow had been continuously drinking to cope with the pain and had finally managed to drink himself into unconsciousness. A patient drinking heavily during surgery, if his mentor saw this, Corleone would have been skinned alive. But in the current environment, where even the principles of sterility were unattainable, no one could demand Corleone do any better. Time passed minute by minute. A large piece of tissue, including the necrotic ear and surrounding rotten flesh, was finally completely excised, revealing the relatively fresh wound surface underneath. Corleone dared not stop, immediately performing a second round of hot saline cleansing, followed by applying honey and bandaging the wound. Under these medical conditions, highly distilled alcohol was impossible to obtain, so he had to settle for the next best thing. Fortunately, there was a lot of honey on the farm. The high sugar content of honey could draw water out of bacteria, inhibiting their growth, making it difficult for most bacteria to survive. Corleone had performed similar experiments in his previous life. Once the bandaging was complete, he was mentally exhausted. His legs gave out, and he collapsed onto the ground. He had independently completed a high-difficulty debridement procedure under terrible conditions, but Corleone felt no joy. After all, debridement was only the first step. Next, would the wound heal smoothly? Would there be a Pseudomonas aeruginosa infection? Would he contract tetanus? In a world without antibiotics, he couldn't guarantee whether the patient would suffer a post-operative infection. Of course, at least for now, the procedure seemed highly successful, and his life should be safe. As for whether Vargo Hoat would spike a fever in a few days and furiously hack him, the doctor, to death as a sacrifice. Corleone couldn't worry about that, as he certainly didn't intend to stay with these vicious criminals for long. Thinking this, he subconsciously touched the gold dragon coin in his pocket. That was quick work, boy. Just then, a large hand clapped onto Corleone's shoulder. Urswick, the second in command, approached with a wide grin, his eyes pathologically bloodshot. Corleone could even make out the strange, dark blue veins bulging on the back of the man's hand. Looks like the surgery was a success, yes. Hearing this, Corleone smiled and echoed, "It appears so, my lord." To his surprise, the smile on Urswick's face instantly froze, replaced by a vicious expression, and he grabbed Corleone by the neck. The man was incredibly strong, and as he tightened his grip, Corleone began to choke, feeling a distinct shadow of death fall over him. He could only clench the gold dragon in his pocket tightly with his right hand, ready to activate the gamble of fate at any moment. Let him go, Urswick. The boss's wounds still need this boy to treat them. Fortunately, the burly man next to them spoke up in time. The man, who was covered in scars and wore bells in his hair, saw that Urswick was ignoring him, immediately drew the scimitar from his waist, and threatened, "Let go." HMPH. Hearing this, Urswick glanced at the other man and released Corleone with a sneer. What a loyal cur you are, Yigo. If you had been this loyal to your Commissar back in that stinking Dothraki sea, you wouldn't have had to flee Westeros after being hunted down, would you? The warrior named Yigo did not respond to Urswick's mockery, merely raising his head to stare at him. The two stared at each other for a moment. Urswick, finding the silence dull, sneered again, "Just stay here and lick your master's boots, Dothraki dog. I need to go find some fun." With that, he turned and left the wooden hut. Corleone clutched his throat, coughing repeatedly, when a large hand suddenly appeared before him. He looked up, grasped the arm Yigo offered, and stood up. "You healed Vargo. Urswick is very unhappy. He thought you would kill Commander Vargo." The Dothraki man explained bluntly to Corleone, "He has wanted to be commander for a long time." "I see." Hearing this, Corleone nodded without saying much more, but he firmly tucked the information away in his mind. It seemed the brave companions were not a unified front. Perhaps he could exploit their internal conflict. "Thank you. Dothraki do not say thank you." Yigo replied stiffly to Corleone's sincere thanks. "Until we return to Harrenhal and old Qyburn takes over Vargo's injury, you must ensure he stays alive. Otherwise, I will kill you directly. Don't worry. You just saved my life, and I'm certain we can become friends." Corleone nodded, smiling as he spoke. "I never refuse the terms set by a friend. I believe in friendship and am willing to be the first to show mine." Hearing Corleone's reply, Yigo looked somewhat surprised. He had been roaming Westeros for over a decade, and flowery phrases like that were usually only heard from the mouths of noble lords. Given the straightforward thinking of a Dothraki, Yigo felt he truly couldn't understand the skinny farmer before him, but he instinctively sensed that Corleone was fundamentally different from the people who had been slaughtered earlier. After a moment's thought, Yigo picked up a piece of hard bread from a nearby table and handed it over. "Eat, Westerosi." As he spoke, he pointed toward the corner where Jaime was tied up next to Brienne. "If you have the strength after you eat, you can look at that man's injuries. Vargo won't allow us to treat him because he offended him. Then why are you?" Seeing the confusion in Corleone's eyes, Yigo continued to explain, "But his father is Lord Tywin Lannister. They say the shit the Lord produces is gold. I do not want a pile of shit, but if it is gold, no one can refuse. So he must not die. In Dothraki lands, a man who has lost a hand rarely lives." He looked Corleone straight in the eyes. "Can you do it? Can you guarantee he won't die on the road back to Harrenhal?" Hearing this, Corleone looked at the hard bread in his hand, took a large bite, and grinned. I told you, I never refuse a request from a friend. But I also won't force my friendship on those who consider me insignificant. When I need your help someday, I expect you to lend a hand without hesitation, my friend. Your name is Yigo, right? Remember, my name is Corleone. Vito Corleone. After eating the oatcake and drinking a small pouch of water, Corleone regained much of his strength. However, he deliberately rested for a while to avoid appearing too eager, then stood up and walked over to Jamie, squatting down to examine his injuries. Criminal. Accomplice to evil. That fooled man would have died from infection, but you cured him. Don't you know that if he lives, more innocent people will die because of him? Before Corleone could even touch Jaime's severed hand, a torrent of curses erupted in his ears. Save it, lady. However, he didn't get angry. Instead, he calmly said, as he lifted Jaime's severed hand, don't try to restrain me from a moral high ground, because I truly don't have much morality to speak of. You, shameless. Seeing Corleone's indifferent expression, Brienne was momentarily speechless, unable to think of any insults, her face flushed red. Shameless. That's utterly unimportant, Miss Brienne of Tarth. He glanced at the woman, who was half a head taller than Jamie, accurately calling her full name, and said in a deep voice, everything I do is simply to survive. This world itself has no such thing as innocence. Can you honestly say you've never lied, or done anything bad? If I'm not mistaken, you once swore to protect Renly Baratheon, yet he was killed right under your nose. Hearing this, Brienne, who was initially furious, first froze, then became even more exasperated, yet found no words to refute. However, Corleone had no intention of letting her go, and continued relentlessly. I'm still alive because I have a skill. I'm very lucky compared to those who were killed. Likewise, you are also very fortunate people, both of you. Although the lion lost a claw, it's much better than having its head chopped off. At least you have me, this accomplice to evil, working tirelessly to examine your injuries and ensure that both sirs can safely wait for your families to pay the ransom, isn't that right? These words seemed to be lecturing Brienne, but in reality, they were meant for Jamie. Corleone had long noticed that this man, who had always prided himself on his swordsmanship, was clearly devastated by the loss of his right hand, having not spoken a single word all day. To accomplish Corleone's plan, he first needed to get him to perk up. Sure enough, Jamie, who had been unresponsive, suddenly twitched twice, then looked up. In the shadow, his emerald eyes seemed to be covered by a layer of gloom. He looked at Corleone, who was cleaning his wound with a hot towel, with no ripple of emotion in his eyes, his voice tinged with a deathly stillness. What is the difference between a lion without claws and fangs, and a truly dead one? Hearing such self-deprecating words, Corleone was not disappointed, instead, he grinned. Any reaction was good. With Jaime Lannister's mental fortitude, how could merely losing a right hand break him? The man was just momentarily stuck in a rut, he needed some guidance. However, Corleone didn't immediately launch into a long speech. Instead, he picked up the severed hand, which was covered in countless impurities and had been painstakingly cleaned, and examined it closely before his eyes. Let me see, the cut is jagged, a typical hacking wound. It seems they didn't use a good steel sword, more like an axe. Cartilage and bone fragments are mixed together, the wound is very badly infected, and you haven't developed a fever yet. I must say, your physical condition is excellent, Sir Jaime. Hearing Corleone call him, Sir, instead of Kingslayer, Jaime's emerald eyes flickered slightly. He lowered his eyes slightly and flicked the severed hand on his chest with his left hand, causing it to sway. If you can reattach it, I promise my father will make you a Grand Maester. 1,000,000 gold dragons. What? Jaime first froze, then looked up, met by the other's serious face. Give me 1,000,000 gold dragons, and I can try to reattach it. Corleone repeated earnestly. He wasn't joking, if he could charge gold dragons and upgrade the surgery skill to LV5, it might actually be possible. However, this angered Jaime. Get lost, I don't need your treatment. The lion, whose claws and fangs were gone, felt he was being played with and tried to pull his arm away forcefully, but Corleone accurately pressed down hard on the wound. Ah! Jaime cried out in pain, cold sweat streaming down his head, his body beginning to convulse. What are you doing? Pain is still present, proving the nervous system can still function. Just as Brienne was about to scold him, she saw Corleone calmly muttering to himself. Congratulations, Esser, you are temporarily out of mortal danger. It wasn't until Corleone released his finger from the wound that Jaime gasped for air, glaring at him resentfully. However, the other seemed completely unconcerned, continuing to treat his wound as he calmly said, among the Night's Watch, there's one of the best rangers. His name is Halfhand Corin. As the name suggests, his right hand lost half its palm in battle. But the Night's Watch's perseverance is clearly stronger than a certain Kingsguard's. He not only learned to fight with his left hand but eventually trained it to be even stronger than his right. That's impossible. Jaime scoffed at this statement, sneering disdainfully, no one in the world can train their left hand to be more proficient than their right, unless they're naturally left-handed. Corleone remained uninjured, merely shaking his head. Don't say impossible, nothing is impossible. Halfhand Corin's name is well known, you can ask anyone in the north and they'll know. Hearing this, Jaime's eyes lit up, and a flame of hope seemed to ignite in his emerald eyes. He wasn't the type to wallow in self-pity when faced with setbacks, otherwise, he wouldn't have served as a Kingsguard for over a decade, bearing the title of Kingslayer. Now, hearing of such a role model, the proud Jaime didn't believe he would be inferior to a mere Night's Watchman. He looked at Corleone, whose eyes were filled with wisdom, and asked in confusion, why do you know so much? Unlike you important people, Sir Jaime. Corleone patiently replied, humble people like me must always keep their eyes open. I will approach my enemies rather than hate them, and even get closer to them, so I can understand them better. You want to resist. Hearing Corleone's unreserved words, Jaime lowered his voice, a slight smile playing on his lips as he pressed, with just you, a farmer who knows a bit of medicine. Not me. Carefully bandaging the severed hand with gauze, Corleone gently patted Jaime's arm. It's us, my friend. Us. Jaime scoffed again. Look at the three of us. A farmer, a Kingsguard who lost his sword-wielding right hand, and a woman who was almost raped, a woman. With all due respect, as soon as we reach Harrenhal, they might immediately chop off your head. Of course, I'm well aware of that. Corleone shrugged, not denying it. Given the nature of Vargo Hote's men, hoping they'd be grateful to their savior was less realistic than wishing Brienne would become a polite lady. However, under Jaime's gaze, Corleone subtly moved closer and whispered. But I understand one truth. Women and children can be careless, but men cannot. In my environment, one slip-up or one wrong word could mean losing my life. So, Esser, let's make a deal. His tone was very calm, yet incredibly serious, as if he were truly discussing a business deal, neither big nor small. I will be very careful, resolve the current troubles we face, and bring you and your friend back to King's Landing. And after that, I hope to receive my reward. Listening to Corleone's extremely serious tone, Jaime moved his severed hand, then exchanged glances with Brienne beside him. In her eyes, Jaime saw only one word. Do it. Anyway, the situation couldn't get any worse. A Lannister always pays his debts. Jaime Lannister seemed to have transformed back into his confident knight self, smiling as he whispered, as long as you can help us return to King's Landing, I promise, you will receive enough gold dragons to fill an entire bathtub. But before that, I need to know your plan, Vito Corleone. I can't tell you too much, but I can reveal a part of it first. Corleone nodded, the candlelight casting half his face in shadow and the other half in light. That deputy commander, Uswick. He will be our breakthrough. You plan to support him in seizing power. Brienne couldn't help but interject, her tone disapproving. Jaime tried every method to bribe them earlier, but these mercenaries have no honor. No. Corleone shook his head, a meaningful smile playing on his lips. Then he reached into his pocket and touched the gold dragon he always kept close. Uswick will help us, not because he wants to, but because he has no other choice. I will make him an offer he cannot refuse. Walking on the soft earth of the farm, each step was accompanied by an uncomfortable stickiness, a somewhat gooey feeling. When he lifted his foot, he could hear a faint, wet, squelch. Corleone couldn't tell if what clung to his boot was wet mud or cooled, congealed blood plasma that had seeped into the soil. From all directions, the fruit trees were laden with the hired laborers who had once toiled alongside him in Sir Finn's orchard. The shadows hanging from the branches swayed slightly in the night breeze, like ripe fruit clinging to the trees. Corleone didn't dare to look around, he simply stared straight ahead, appearing like a complete stranger, his heart seemingly untouched by the tragic fate of his fellow men. His status within the warriors group hadn't substantially changed due to treating vague. He was still a captive who could be executed at any time, merely temporarily useful. However, this slight status was not enough to grant Corleone the opportunity for free movement. Perhaps, once Vargo Hote, who was drunk and sound asleep in the wooden hut, awoke, he would be senselessly hanged from an apple tree. Freedom. It didn't exist. Escorted by a bandit to the edge of the woods, the two stopped. Go in, doctor. Noseless Rorger gestured with his chin. He was somewhat hunched, bulky, and covered in black hair, looking more ferocious than anyone else in the warriors group. But it had to be said, appearances could be deceiving, this fellow happened to be the most polite among these bandits. For this meeting, Corleone had rehearsed his speech countless times in his mind. However, unexpectedly, when he made his request to Rorger, who was guarding him, the other party agreed without even asking, saving him a lot of trouble. Thank you very much for bringing me here, my lord. Corleone bowed sincerely, his voice steady. You're welcome. Rorger grinned, his furry hand resting on Corleone's shoulder. I never refuse a doctor's request. After all, no one can guarantee they won't get injured, right? Go on, Uswick is in there, but I suggest you wait until he's finished before speaking, as that guy never likes to be disturbed when he's having fun. As he spoke, his smile grew even brighter, and a hint of kindness emerged from his vicious face. Your kindness, Lord Rorger, I will remember. Hearing this, Corleone's lips curved upwards, returning the smile, and he nodded slightly. He didn't dally further, took a deep breath, and tried to lighten his steps as he walked alone into the dim woodland. After circling a few apple trees, a small, relatively open clearing suddenly appeared ahead. In the center of the clearing, tied to a thick tree trunk, was a large, pale chunk of flesh. His age was probably between 10 and 13, but his massive body made him look like a deformed adult. Corleone recognized him at a glance, it was Derek, Sir Finn's only son. The landlord's foolish son, Corleone silently judged. Not far in front of him, Uswick was completely engrossed in his game. Young Master Derek, fatter than a pig, was stripped to the waist and tied to the tree, like a fattened pig awaiting slaughter. Uswick didn't use a sharp weapon, but a sharpened wooden stick, slowly prodding the boy's greasy flesh, as blood mixed with fat oozed out. Listening to the suppressed screams and pleas, a morbid satisfaction spread across his face. As a doctor, Lord Uswick, please allow me to offer you a professional suggestion. Corleone did not follow Rorger's advice. Instead, he boldly stepped forward and spoke. Your method is too inefficient, and it's easy for him to go into shock from blood loss or pain, losing consciousness too early, which would be uninteresting. Uswick, who was holding the wooden stick, didn't even have time to be angry, he froze. He had tortured many people, but this was the first time someone had offered professional advice on his torture methods in such a tone. What did you say? He almost thought he had misheard, frowning as he turned to look at Corleone. Corleone shrugged, then pointed to the messy wounds on Derek's body, and calmly spoke. While shallow cuts are painful, heavy bleeding dilutes the sensation of pain and can easily lead to shock. Damaging areas with dense nerve endings, such as fingertips or armpits, certainly produces intense pain, but it doesn't last long. As he spoke, he seemed to inadvertently draw closer. If you want to achieve more prolonged, more profound feedback, I suggest you avoid major blood vessels and organs and try piercing muscle groups in non-weight-bearing areas, such as the front of the thigh or the upper arm, controlling the depth to half a finger to a full finger, avoiding the femoral and brachial arteries. This way, it can cause continuous burning pain and functional impairment without being immediately fatal. He described it so clearly, so calmly, that even the veteran Uswick felt an inexplicable chill. But what followed was a great excitement and curiosity, as if he had discovered a kindred spirit, or even an expert. Ah, this is what you call professional. Doctor, you're a godful monster. He retracted the wooden stick and stared intently at Corleone, his eyes showing a mixture of surprise, admiration, and extreme interest. I like it. Keep talking. Please give me a dagger. Walking up to Uswick and extending his hand, Corleone's tone was calm and matter of fact. Raising an eyebrow, Uswick swiftly pulled out a small knife from his bosom and handed it over. Taking it, Corleone walked up to the chubby boy tied to the tree, looked at his desperate, hateful eyes, and spoke softly. I don't hate you, young Master Derek. Although you always like to whip us with the steward, and press your over 300-pound weight on the hired laborers, riding us like horses. Remember, you crushed 2 people to death, and 3 more were crippled because of it. Seeing Derek's eyes begin to turn bewildered and fearful, Corleone seemed somewhat regretful and shook his head. It seemed he didn't remember. But this was normal. After all, the boy appeared to have lower intelligence than ordinary people, which Corleone speculated was due to inbreeding. It was said that Sir Finn had married his cousin. I don't hate you. Corleone repeated. Everything I'm about to do has nothing to do with revenge, this is merely a necessary business transaction. Of course, not everyone can profit from every business deal, someone must make sacrifices. Like you. Squelched tilde. The dagger quickly plunged into the thigh, twisted, and pulled out, avoiding all major blood vessels. Derek let out a shrill wail, his body convulsing violently, yet his consciousness was remarkably clear as he endured the continuous, sharp agony. Look. This way, he can suffer for a long time, but won't die immediately. Turning around, Corleone handed the bloodied small knife back to the stunned Uswick, his tone containing an element of instruction, as if conducting a medical teaching demonstration. This is what I just spoke of, control and efficiency. Uswick was completely astonished at this point. The bloody dagger was clearly right before his eyes, having been removed from the victim's body, yet the chubby boy was still convulsing and wailing violently, the continuous pain could not be fooled. Professional. So professional. Teach me. Uswick licked his lips, his eyes filled with a craving for knowledge and the excitement of inflicting violence. Doctor, I want to learn this. Corleone's lips curved slightly upwards. The first step, establishing a sense of kinship, had succeeded. You may call me Vito Corleone, Lord Uswick. Don't worry, I will teach you everything. He smiled as he placed the bloody dagger in the other's hand, then changed the subject, his calm smile imbued with a strange persuasiveness. However, torturing an insignificant fat man is a minor skill. Don't you want to apply this precision and control to grander goals? For example, deciding who truly deserves to sit on the Lord of Harrenhal's seat forever. The Lord of Harrenhal. Uswick's pupils suddenly constricted. He held the dagger, quickly turned to survey his surroundings, and then lowered his voice. What exactly do you want to say, Doctor? Vito Corleone. Meeting his unfriendly gaze, Corleone did not hide anything and stated frankly, I feel it's not worth it for you, Lord. Not worth it. Uswick narrowed his eyes, clearly intrigued by the remark. Yes, not worth it. Corleone took a step forward, his voice not loud, but clear and strong. I heard that the warriors group, led by Commander Vaguehote, traveled all the way from the Free Cities to Westeros to capture the massive Harrenhal for Tywin Lannister. However, Vaguehote betrayed the Lannister garrison for the title of Lord of Harrenhal, and opened the gates of Harrenhal to the Northern Army. Uswick snorted, acknowledging it. These things had spread throughout the Riverlands, so it was not surprising that Corleone knew. As a member of the warriors group, Uswick also didn't care about such acts of betraying an employer. In fact, Vague's defection was largely instigated by a few of their old members. After all, they were mercenaries, not knights, and didn't need to uphold any righteous, knightly bullshit, only profit could drive them. With all due respect, Lord. Corleone continued, his voice full of magnetism, the dirty work, the hard work, the dangerous work, all done together by the brothers, right? But when Lord Bolton distributed rewards, all the benefits fell to Vaguehote alone. He changed his tone, which suddenly became sharp. Lord of Harrenhal, what a wonderful title. It represents the largest castle in the Seven Kingdoms, and a vast, fertile territory. And what about you all? Half of Corleone's face was in shadow, like a devil constantly whispering in Uswick's ear. You, Lord, the deputy commander of the warriors group, and those old brothers who fought alongside him, what did you get? A few empty praises. Or continue as you are now, finding pleasure in torturing a child on a dilapidated farm. Is that fair? These words were like a knife, precisely cutting into the most imbalanced part of Yuswik's heart. His face darkened, and the hand holding the knife tightened, but he did not retort. Seeing him gradually swayed, Corleone immediately seized the opportunity to add fuel to the fire. To be frank with you, Lord, our Lord of Harrenhal Veghhoat, his good days are almost over. What do you mean? Hearing this, Yuswik's eyelids twitched, then he calmly asked, wasn't the surgery very successful? Of course, the surgery was indeed very successful. Looking directly into Yuswik's sharp gaze, Corleone smiled confidently, my skill is absolutely unmatched. Then why do you say? He had already started to run a fever before I even performed the surgery. Corleone calmly and methodically replied, I removed most of the necrotic flesh, delaying death, but this is like extinguishing an open flame while the embers beneath still burn. I must say, his medical knowledge is almost non-existent. He not only forcefully reattached the severed ear, causing a severe infection, but also drank heavily while having a fever. This is practically suicide. He took a step closer, his voice even lower, yet filled with the authority of his medical profession. By tomorrow at the latest, the high fever will return, more intense than before. He will be burning hot all over, start to babble, and this process will continuously deplete his vitality, making him extremely weak. But with Commander Vague's tenacious physique, he might very well hold on until Harrenhal, where there are maesters left by Lord Bolton, and that doctor named Qyburn, right? If they take over, Vague might very well be pulled back from the hands of death. He must not see Qyburn. Hearing this, Yuswik almost instinctively roared. Exactly. Corleone immediately nodded in affirmation and then proposed a solution. We must let all of this end, naturally, on the road. And I can precisely control this process, for example, by applying something not so clean to his wound, without anyone knowing. He will suffer from a persistent high fever like a truly gravely wounded man, and eventually, one night, peacefully pass away in his sleep. Everyone will only believe he died from his severe injuries, no one will suspect us, because this is the natural progression of the injury. But there is one problem that must be solved in this. What problem? Yuswik's breathing quickened a bit, and he eagerly pressed for an answer, clearly very tempted by Corleone's proposal. Fever. Corleone uttered the word again. When Commander Vague discovers his temperature rising and his consciousness blurring, even if he doesn't suspect me, the doctor, of foul play, he will think the surgery failed. At that time, the first thing he is likely to do is have someone twist off my head. Saying this, he spread his hands in a gesture of helplessness. I don't want to die. And once I die, no one will be able to precisely control his dying process, and all our plans will fall apart. Hearing this, Yuswik first frowned deeply. To be honest, he didn't care at all about Corleone's life or death, but he truly needed the other party's cooperation right now. It must be said, Corleone's move was very clever, he actively exposed his own vulnerability. This not only didn't make Yuswik think he was incompetent, but instead made Yuswik think he was thoughtful and further bound their interests tightly together. Corleone's life or death directly impacted whether Yuswik's ambitions could be realized. I understand. As expected, after only a moment's hesitation, Yuswik nodded heavily, a knowing, sinister smile appearing on his face. No one can touch you until that guy is completely rotten. After all, a group can't be without a doctor, can it? Having received the other party's assurance, Corleone nodded with satisfaction. As he had said before, he would offer Yuswik a condition he couldn't refuse. For an ambitious deputy commander, what kind of condition could he not refuse? Of course, it was to get rid of the old commander and take his place. Commander Veghhoat will die of a high fever within 3 days, as for you, my lord. Seeing that the time was right, Corleone smiled. He lowered his voice and said, word by word, compared to bringing his corpse back to Harrenhal, you have a better choice, a shortcut to the pinnacle of power. The Kingslayer. At the mention of that name, Yuswik's eyes instantly widened, looking at Corleone in disbelief. However, this new doctor merely continued to loyally outline a grand blueprint for him. Remember, it was Veghhoat who cut off his right hand, not you, Yuswik. You can completely take this, goodwill, and go directly to Tywin Lannister. Think about it, for Lord Tywin, who just lost his son's right hand, this is a huge favor. Once his army recaptures Harrenhal, then who do you think that title of Lord of Harrenhal will fall upon? As Corleone's words fell, this grand betrayal plan exploded in Uswick's mind. The risk was immense, but the reward was unprecedented. To directly ally with the king in the north, and truly, stably possess Harrenhal. He stared intently at Corleone, as if seeing this seemingly frail young man for the first time, and after a long while, slowly spoke, "You truly are a madman, Vito Corleone. But we only recently betrayed Lord Tywin and defected to the king in the north. Will the Lord believe our loyalty? I need some time to think about it carefully." "Of course, my lord. Caution is a virtue. Such an important decision naturally requires careful consideration." Hearing this, Corleone changed his previous demeanor and did not continue to incite him. After all, being too forceful would only arouse suspicion. He had already presented Uswick with an offer he couldn't refuse, a golden staircase leading to the throne of Lord of Harrenhal, and even higher positions. The seed had been sown, ambition ignited, any more incitement would only provoke wariness or even be counterproductive. The two were silent for a long time, each contemplating their future, and after a good while, Uswick suddenly spoke. "Vito Corleone." His voice returned to its previous coldness, yet could not conceal the fervor within him. He raised the dagger and casually pointed its tip at the bound Derek. "You said so much just now, but I haven't received any guarantees. So, prove your resolve to me, right now. Using the control and efficiency you just taught me, send this fooled fat pig on his way, let me see your technique." Hearing this, Corleone's face was very calm, without a ripple. He had long anticipated this moment. In this world where the strong prey on the weak, in this group composed of thugs and ambitious individuals, nothing was more convincing than having blood on their hands together. "Learning is everywhere, Lord." Corleone took the dagger, walked step by step towards Derek, who was tied to the tree, and stopped. The firelight cast flickering shadows on his face, his eyes as indifferent as water. It was strange, attempting to kill for the first time, he felt no burden at all, just like the first time he held a scalpel, when even his mentor praised his psychological fortitude. "This is just a business, young Master Derek," he repeated once more. "In a transaction, someone always has to pay the price." The moment his words fell, Corleone moved. He did not choose the heart or throat. Instead, with a flick of his wrist, the dagger precisely entered the tiny gap between Derek's left carotid artery and trachea. PFF'd. Derek's corpulent body stiffened abruptly. He opened his mouth wide but could not make a sound, only copious warm blood gushed from the wound on his neck. His pupils rapidly dilated in the firelight, and his body convulsed violently a few times before his fat head slumped powerlessly. The entire process, from action to conclusion, took only a few seconds, clean and swift, no harder than slaughtering a chicken. Turning around, Corleone calmly handed the dagger back to Uswick, his face still devoid of any extra expression, appearing very professional. Taking the dagger, which still held residual warmth, Uswick curiously observed the deep, bottomless dark eyes before him, illuminated by the firelight. His lips slowly curled into a satisfied and appreciative, sinister smile, as if he had found a kindred spirit. "Very good, Vito Corleone. Welcome to this game of power." It was nearly midnight when Corleone was escorted by Rorger back near the wooden hut. His conversation with Uswick had lasted a long time, and for most of it, Corleone had been educating the pervert about human anatomy. The distribution of blood vessels, the path of nerves, the layers of muscle, the weak points of the skeleton, these professional terms opened a door to a new world for Uswick. Having been a pervert his entire life, he hadn't even known there were so many intricacies to human anatomy. The methods of torture he had once been proud of seemed incredibly crude under Corleone's clear and systematic analysis. If Uswick possessed the ambition of a scheming warlord, he probably would have immediately displayed his personal charm and taken Corleone, this talent, into his service. Of course, that was impossible. No matter how ruthless, vicious, and cruel the guy was, he was still just the second in command of a bandit group. Nevertheless, under the spell of Corleone's eloquence, Uswick quickly began treating him as a kindred spirit, and Corleone even gained some benefits. Feeling the weighty 10 gold dragons in his pocket, Corleone couldn't help but feel a little emotional. The time it took to earn his first pot of gold in this world was earlier than he had imagined. It had to be said that when it came to winning people over, Uswick clearly had a knack for it. At the very least, he wasn't stingy. In his words, Corleone had already demonstrated his resolve by personally killing the knight's son, and he needed to ensure that Corleone stayed on his side. In this world, self-interest was always the sturdy rope that bound two unrelated people tightly together. 10 gold dragons. This was no small figure. One had to know that in peacetime, this amount could almost fully equip a true knight, including armor, horse, and weapons. Even now, with the war having lasted over a year and prices skyrocketing, 10 gold dragons were enough for a family of 5 to live comfortably for more than half a year, which showed just how generous Uswick was. After all, even when Jaime Lannister, the captive who could be called the richest second-generation noble in the Seven Kingdoms, escaped, the Duke of Riverrun only offered a bounty of 1,000 gold dragons. Recharge, start the draw. As he walked, Corleone opened the system panel. Even though he had never seen this much money in his life, he still unhesitatingly recharged all the gold dragons into the system. After all, the most important thing now was to increase his strength. Only by surviving could he earn more wealth, which he could then use to fund the system, keeping the cycle going. Currently, apart from a single surgical operation LV2, Corleone had no innate skills. Under these circumstances, even if the current gold dragons only allowed him to draw one LV1 skill, it was extremely crucial. As he recited the command internally, the 10 gold dragons in his arms instantly vanished without explanation, and immediately afterward, the system roulette began spinning wildly. Ding tilde tilde acquired skill. Insight LV1. There was no explanation, just a solitary line of text flickering before his eyes, just like his surgical operation LV2. It seemed that, in the system's view, these low-level skills were not worthy of wasting space on a description. Corleone frowned at first. After all, given his current predicament, it would have been best to draw a skill that could immediately boost his combat power. Something like swordsmanship or combat. Compared to those, an auxiliary skill like insight seemed a little disappointing. However, just as he felt a slight pang of regret, a clear stream flowed into his consciousness, and Corleone suddenly found that the world seemed different. He slightly tilted his head, and Rorger's ferocious face came into view. Attention is not focused, eyes occasionally glance toward companions drinking by the distant bonfire, appearing distracted. The left leg shows extremely subtle incoordination when walking, suggesting a previous injury. In just 2 seconds, details he had never noticed before were naturally analyzed. So that's it. Corleone's eyes lit up, and he instantly understood. This skill couldn't be more perfect for his current situation. Go on in yourself, doctor. Sure enough, upon reaching the wooden hut, Rorger did not personally escort him inside as before. Instead, he patted Corleone's shoulder kindly and spoke with feigned swagger. Vice Commander Uswick said you're one of our warriors group now. If I get hurt later, I'll have to rely on you to treat me properly. But I have to warn you. Saying this, he gestured toward the hut with his chin, a look of disdain on his face. That Dothraki savage isn't easy to get along with. The commander trusts no one but him. Just don't do anything that makes him uncomfortable. If he tries anything, shout loudly, and Fang and I will rush in to help you immediately. After speaking, he ignored Corleone and strode toward his companions in the distance, clearly eager for a drink. This guy must have guessed something. Watching the figure walk away, Corleone pondered inwardly. This seemingly rough and bulky man actually had a very subtle mind. Perhaps he had guessed some part of his and Uswick's plan, but hadn't exposed it, even offering a specific warning. Interesting. Corleone narrowed his eyes. In times of chaos, it seemed he truly couldn't underestimate anyone who had survived the war. Pushing open the wooden door, before he could step inside, a sturdy figure appeared before him. You were gone a long time. The Dothraki's tone was unfriendly, his eyes full of suspicion. Yeah, I stopped to take a dump. Corleone spread his hands and shrugged, looking completely nonchalant. I was hung up for a long time and then did 2 surgeries back to back. I was dying to go. Hearing this, the suspicion in Yigo's eyes didn't completely fade, but he still stepped aside slightly, signaling for Corleone to enter. He glanced behind Corleone and asked, "Where did Rorger go?" "He was supposed to be guarding Commander Vague with me. He went to drink." Corleone walked inside, casually taking off his ragged clothes and shoes, revealing a body covered in whip marks, and tossed them aside. The movement was small, but the meaning was clear. As if saying, "Look, I'm not carrying any weapons." Then, he sat down on the pile of dry grass, his posture relaxed, even rubbing his shoulders wearily, like a craftsman who had just finished heavy labor. He said, "With you guarding here, everyone can rest well tonight and won't need his help. It seems both the commander and Rorger trust you greatly, Yigo." This sentence sounded like a simple relay of information, but it was actually a small provocation and test. Sure enough, Yigo let out a cold snort through his nose. Dothraki revere valor, and the feeling of being discussed behind his back would certainly not be pleasant. However, he didn't continue to question him, as the stance Corleone was currently displaying showed he was completely defenseless. Corleone looked around. Vargo Hoat was still sleeping in the most comfortable spot in the center of the room, lying on a soft, dry pile of hay and rags. His face was abnormally flushed in the flickering firelight, reeking of alcohol, and his snores shook the air. Jaime and Brienne had already been taken away by another member of the warriors group before Corleone left, as Yigo alone couldn't guard several people simultaneously. Seeing that Corleone was sprawled out on the straw heap resting, seemingly with no intention of checking Vague's injuries, Yigo frowned and walked over to him. "It's time to change the commander's bandages, Vito Corleone. You yourself said they needed to be changed every 2 hours. Ah, has it been that long?" Hearing this, Corleone reluctantly opened his eyes slightly, looking extremely tired. However, he didn't say anything, patted his behind, climbed up, and walked staggeringly toward Vague, who was still fast asleep. After pretending to examine him for a moment, Corleone suddenly remarked out of the blue, "What a formidable man. To be able to sleep so comfortably after such a severe injury. He is." The simple Yigo didn't doubt him, merely agreeing, "Commander Vague is a worthy call. Since following him, we have never lost a single battle." Hearing this, Corleone merely glanced at him, neither denying nor agreeing. Given Vargo Hoat's character, the warriors group naturally wouldn't lose battles, because their enemies were always carefully selected weaklings. Corleone's hands didn't stop moving as he carefully began to unwrap the bandages. He didn't turn around, but the effects of insight allowed him to clearly see the expression on Yigo's face out of the corner of his eye. That was not absolute loyalty, but the Dothraki's inherent dedication to following the strong. Corleone smiled and continued his probing. It is said that back on the Dothraki Grass Sea, there was an invincible Khal named Drogo, who commanded over 40,000 Dothraki warriors, reputed to be the strongest in history. But later, he fell from his horse due to a wound infection, and his followers scattered because of it. That's right, I heard about him too. Yigo, who seemed to have been starved of conversation for a long time, actively chimed in with a heavy Dothraki accent. He was the son of Khal Barbo. They say his braid reached his thigh, and he never lost a single fight. Corleone curled his lip, but unfortunately, he died, didn't he? Even the mightiest eagle cannot escape the fate of falling. Exactly. Yigo nodded and replied in a matter-of-fact tone. That is why his Khalasar scattered like frightened wild horses, to be divided by new strongmen. This is the principle of the Dothraki. When the lion falls, the hyenas feast on his corpse, and a new lion king is born in blood and fire. Silently listening to this cold philosophy of survival, Corleone quietly observed Yigo's reaction while skillfully undoing the bandage, revealing the wound underneath. Previously, he had cleaned the wound thoroughly, but now, at the edge of the remaining ear tissue, an ominous yellowish-green trace had faintly appeared, and the surrounding skin was more red and swollen than before. The corner of Corleone's mouth curved upward, and he spoke clearly. It's a shame, Yigo. I think you need to start looking for a new call to follow. Because our esteemed Count Vargo Hoat doesn't have much time left. What did you say? As soon as he finished speaking, a low growl was heard, and a cold blade instantly pressed against Corleone's neck. Yigo stepped forward, one hand on his scimitar and the other pinching Vargo's chin, moving his face to the side for a better look. Sure enough, the edge of the wound behind his ear already showed obvious gray decay, accompanied by a small amount of yellowish-green viscous discharge, and a faint smell of putrefaction wafted over. The Dothraki had seen too many wounds and deaths. He knew what these signs meant. You promised. You promised you'd cure him. You liar. He turned his head and roared at Corleone, feeling like a fool who had been played. The cold sensation from the scimitar was so real, and with the enhancement of Insight LV1, Corleone could even clearly see Yigo's anger, causing every muscle in his face to twitch. Yet, he didn't struggle, letting the blade rest against his skin, his voice remarkably steady. I am a doctor, Yigo, a professional doctor. I cleaned all the necrotic flesh from his wound. I did my best, but even the most professional doctor cannot cure a patient who is determined to die. Corleone stared intently into Yigo's eyes, gradually adding emphasis to his tone. He pressed his necrotic organs onto the wound, and then he drank himself like a dead pig during the surgery. This isn't a failure of my medical skill. This is the gods taking his life, his foolish actions, ringing his own death knell prematurely. Yigo's breathing was still heavy, his teeth clenched, but he didn't know what to say. Corleone caught the wavering in his eyes, knowing the time was right. He took a step forward, completely disregarding the cold scimitar at his neck, and unhurriedly began to re-bandage Vargo. Face the reality, Yigo. The fever will recur, the wound will ooze foul pus, and in 3 days at most, he will completely become a corpse in agonizing torment. In this situation, with a knife at his throat, Corleone displayed an unusual calmness. He stared intently into Yigo's eyes. The insight skill allowed him to clearly capture the violent contraction of the other party's pupils, and the constantly flickering gaze beneath the facade of composure. Indeed, Corleone thought to himself, the Dothraki would not pledge loyalty to a Khal who lacked leadership and was about to die. Yigo was not entirely loyal to Vargo as a person, he was loyal to the Khal position Vargo represented and the decisive power it held. As this source of power was about to dry up and collapse, the Dothraki warrior's instinct was awakening his primal anxiety for survival and belonging. Why are you telling me this? Yigo withdrew his scimitar, staring coldly at Corleone. You could have pretended nothing happened and dragged it out for a while longer. What is your purpose? Although he came from a nomadic tribe and was uncultured, this did not mean he was a fool. On the contrary, compared to his fellow Dothraki, Yigo was much smarter, otherwise he wouldn't have been able to survive in Westeros for over a decade. Hearing this, Corleone smiled calmly, and even took a step forward to close the distance between them. His voice dropped even lower, yet it carried a sense of ample power. Uswick wanted me to tamper with the surgery and secretly kill Vargo Hoat. I agreed. Corleone's words were startling, and the shock in Yigo's eyes grew even more intense. However, just as he instinctively wanted to call out to his companions, Corleone stepped closer again, saying in a deep voice, the Dothraki only follow the strongest steed on the plains, Yigo. When a Khal has lost his leadership ability, then the best choice is undoubtedly to find a new, more promising person to lead their direction. You want me to pledge allegiance to Uswick. Hearing this, a cruel arc appeared at the corner of Yigo's mouth, and his right hand quietly tightened around his scimitar. It seemed that if Corleone said one more word, he would immediately act to cut off the other party's head. After all, for Yigo, although Uswick was cruel and insidious, when it came to strength or swordsmanship, or even ruthlessness, he was far inferior to Vargo Hoat. To make a Dothraki warrior like Yigo pledge allegiance to him could truly be considered an insult. Under the enhancement of insight, the other party's movements naturally did not escape Corleone's eyes, yet he merely slowly raised his hand and gently tapped his own temple under Yigo's incredulous gaze. Power, sometimes, doesn't just reside between swords, my friend, but also here, an insight into the mists, eyes that see through hearts, and wrists that control destiny. The fate of a person who sees the essence in 1 second is naturally different from that of a person who spends half a lifetime unable to see the essence of a matter. People like Uswick will never see the essence of power in their lifetime. Once he controls power, he will quickly be destroyed by it. What exactly do you want to say? I, Vito Corleone. Looking at the shocked Yigo, Corleone's tone was solemn, as if he were performing a sacred covenant. You can choose to pledge allegiance to me. Yigo laughed loudly. Just you. A farmer, can you even lift a sword? Facing this sharp question, Corleone not only didn't get angry but instead showed a strange, confident smile on his face. The Warden of the West, Lord Tywin Lannister, the Master of Castle Rock, how many years has it been since he personally wielded a longsword and charged into battle? 10 years. 20 years. But he only needs to say one sentence, make one judgment, to decide the life and death of tens of thousands of people. Corleone's tone was incredibly confident, as if he was born with the aura of a king, even causing Ego to pause for a moment. But you are not Tywin Lannister, you are just a farmer who was hanged on an apple tree. If we hadn't happened to pass by, you would already be a dried corpse. How can a person who cannot even guarantee his own life talk about power? Hearing this, Corleone's eyes seemed to pierce through time, returning to that apple tree. Hanging on a tree. He chuckled, and that laugh carried a sense of rebirth. You were right, that cowardly, ignorant, and helpless Corleone indeed died on that tree. Corleone spread his arms, as if embracing this world with a brand new posture, his voice suddenly becoming resonant and powerful. I am no longer the person I once was. I gained new life on that apple tree. The gods gave me revelation, gave me eyes to see through the mists and the power to control destiny. As he spoke, under Yigo's uncertain gaze, Corleone slowly pulled out a gold coin, shimmering with a faint golden light, from his pocket. He held the gold coin between his fingertips, raising it between them. Under the firelight, the gold coin seemed to come alive, emitting a faint, almost inaudible hum. Corleone looked up, his eyes becoming incredibly sharp, filled with defiance and confidence. You don't believe me. Very good, the Dothraki like to speak with strength, right? As he spoke, Corleone bent his finger and flicked the gold coin into the air. The coin, symbolizing wealth, tumbled continuously, its reflected light alternately illuminating the faces of the two men in the wooden house. Let's make a bet. Wield your scimitar at me, Dothraki. With the gold coin in hand, Corleone grinned, his voice seemingly filled with a special, indescribable power. The bet is whether your blade can cut off my head. The cold morning mist wrapped the farm in a blanket of gray. Vargo Hoat woke from his sleep, his head pounding fiercely and a searing, tearing sensation in his throat. Godfool it. He cursed indistinctly, his voice hoarse like grinding iron. Every heartbeat made the vessels in his temples throb, and the wound near his ear pulsed with sharp pain. I drank way too much yesterday. He instinctively blamed all his discomfort on the excessive consumption of cheap ale the night before, not attributing his symptoms to a fever. After all, to withstand the unbearable agony of the surgery, he had been forced to drink himself into a stupor. Starting today, I quit drinking. Vargo Hoat slammed his right fist onto the straw mattress beneath him and his cloudy gaze swept across the dim wooden shack. In the corner, the doctor was curled up in a pile of hay, wrapped in a dirty piece of fur, breathing steadily as if deep in sleep. His most trusted subordinate, Yij, stood responsibly by the bedside, arms crossed and back straight. Seeing the silent Dothraki warrior, the anxiety that had sprung up in Vargo's heart due to his weakness slightly subsided. A man like him, who lived by the blade and dared to betray even Lord Tywin Lannister, maintained 3 parts vigilance even while nursing at his mother's breast, yet he held a strange trust for Yij. After all, the Dothraki mind was too simple, they only followed strength, like a trained hound. Vargo did not notice, however, that Yij was positioned between him and Corleone, and subtly closer to Corleone. Rather than guarding the Earl of Harrenhal, he looked more like a wall, intentionally or unintentionally separating Vargo from the sleeping Corleone. Water, Yij. Vargo spoke weakly, and a waterskin was immediately handed to him. He uncorked it and, as usual, gulped down several mouthfuls, but the cold liquid rushing into his throat stung like razor blades scraping past. Cough, cough, cough. Before he could drink much, he couldn't help but dry heave, followed by a severe bout of coughing. After coughing for a long while, Vargo wiped his mouth with the back of his hand and raised the waterskin again, though this time he drank in very small sips, appearing as refined as a true noble. Yij, standing nearby, remained silent, simply watching him. Vargo's heavy brow furrowed instantly as his gaze inadvertently swept over Yij's waist. Where is your arak? That Dothraki curved sword was one Yij had brought from across the narrow sea, carried for over a decade and never leaving his side. Yij himself had once admitted that a Dothraki's curved blade was an extension of their arm, yet it was nowhere to be seen now. Broken. Yij replied, his voice steady and his face still devoid of expression. I threw it away. Ha! Vargo scoffed, but the movement immediately pulled at the wound on his ear, making him gasp sharply. He harbored no suspicion, however. Yij's honesty and straightforwardness had long been tested by time. If he said he threw it away, then he certainly did. I told you full well before, those fancy toys of yours are only good for slicing throats, they're useless against a truly armored knight. Vargo waved his hand, then generously unbuckled the finely wrought steel longsword from his own waist and tossed it to Yij with a show of bravado. Here, take it. You might not be used to it, but as my bloodrider, Vargo Hote's bloodrider, you can practice swordsmanship with me more often from now on. He deliberately used the Dothraki term, attempting to reinforce the master-subordinate relationship between himself and Yij. He even joked, I hear you Dothraki share everything with your blood riders, even your wives, right? Some Khalists do that. Good then. Hearing this, Vargo Hote grinned widely. When we get to Harrenhal, I'll go find a wife at the Red Mill, and once I'm done with her, you can have a turn. Ha 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 ha. Watching Vargo's crude display, Yij ran a finger over the cold sword hilt but said nothing. He simply hung the weapon, which was entirely unsuited to his fighting style, on his waist, replacing the curved blade that had accompanied him for many years. Vargo, however, mistook this silence for acquiescence, and his smile grew even brighter. He had said this intentionally, knowing that after the surgery and with his severe hangover, he could become weak at any moment. At a time like this, he needed to rally all those loyal to him to prevent the ambitious Urswick from suddenly causing trouble. He also needed to return to Harrenhal quickly and have Qyburn treat him properly. An itinerant doctor encountered by chance, Corlion, clearly could not be trusted by Vargo, neither for his skill nor his loyalty. Wake that fellow up. He stopped worrying about the weapon and pointed a thumb at Corlion, urging, hurry up. We need to travel a few more leagues before noon and get us a wife sooner. Only when he returned to Harrenhal and Qyburn confirmed his ear was fine could he truly relax, and then, perhaps he could consider cutting out the tongue of this farmer-turned-doctor, lest he speak too freely. Kriak tilde. The wooden door groaned open with a grating sound, and the damp, cold mist poured into the room, causing Vargo to shiver. Outside, most members of the brave companions were already mounted, fine droplets of water condensing on their armor and leather coats, their horses laden with valuable goods stolen from the farm. The horses snorted, their breath mingling with the thick mist. Even the two prisoners were already securely bound to the same horse. Brienne held her head high, her blue eyes fixed on Vargo, burning with silent fury, while Jaime lowered his eyelids, his golden hair plastered to his cheek by dew and mud, seemingly indifferent to everything happening around him. Everything seemed the same as yesterday, without any change. Even Urswick, the second in command, immediately trotted forward upon seeing Vargo emerge, his face contorted into a flattering, somewhat comical smile. Boss. The seven bless you, you look much better. His voice was exaggerated, but his eyes quickly scanned Vargo's slightly feverish, flushed face and subtly trembling fingers. Urswick's smile grew brighter as he reported loudly. The raven was sent out before dawn, flying straight to Tarth. I believe it won't be long before that big woman's father, the Earl, delivers mountains of sapphires as ransom. Knowing Vargo's complicated feelings about the Kingslayer, he deliberately ignored Jaime. Hearing this, Vargo Hote looked around at his company. The gear was ready, the prisoners were secured, and even Urswick, that wild dog who always sniffed around in the shadows, was acting so obediently now. All of this completely reassured him, even his physical weakness seemed to lessen somewhat. It seems this farmer doctor actually had some skill. When they reached Harrenhal and the king in the north received word that he had captured the Kingslayer, even Roose Bolton would have to look at him with respect. Thinking this, the alcohol from last night's binge slowly rushed back to his head, temporarily suppressing his physical discomfort. He grinned, revealing his crooked, yellow-black teeth, took 2 steps forward, mounted his striped horse, and, struggling to steady his slightly swaying body, swung his arm with smug satisfaction. Move out. Back to Harrenhal. This cursed fog is thick. Keep your eyes peeled, all of you. At the commander's order, the company slowly began to move, the clatter of metal and the sound of hooves treading through mud sounding especially muffled. Vargo Hote rode at the front, maintaining his undeniable posture as leader. He did not look back, nor did he see the fleeting look of malice in Urswic's eyes. On horseback, the tightly bound Jaime Lannister subtly lifted his head, a lion-like emerald eye visible through his dirty hair, watching the person who was the last to emerge from the shack. Sensing his gaze, Corlyon also looked up, and their eyes met. The farmer doctor did not respond, simply and calmly pulling a gold dragon from his pouch, flicking it lightly with his finger. The gold coin flipped up and down in the air, reflecting the morning light filtering through the thin mist. The one-armed knight's pupils contracted slightly. After a moment of silence, he lowered his head again, hiding himself once more behind his dirty golden hair. But Brienne, beside him, vaguely sensed that her companion's breathing, which had been as calm as still water, seemed to quicken slightly. It was not fear or weakness, but rather the suppressed, impatient restlessness of a lion long imprisoned, lurking in the shadows, who had finally caught the scent of its prey. The company gradually moved away, the sound of hooves and clamor dissipating, leaving behind a silent, dead farm. On the sparse apple trees, hanging corpses swayed and spun gently in the morning breeze, like overripe fruit. Among all the fruit, one corpse was the most striking, presenting a fresh, moist crimson hue across its entire body. Clearly, his skin had been flayed completely from head to toe. The muscle fibers exposed to the damp air were clearly visible, and although the face was unrecognizable, the blood-soaked leather sash around his waist indicated that he had once been the most powerful man on this farm. This bear, all black and brown, covered in fur. Bear. Oh, people are saying, come see the beauty. Beauty. He understands, but I'm a bear. All black and brown, covered in fur. Sniffing maidens, mead wafting. Tear off their dresses, reveal, ha 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 ha. On the muddy roads of the Riverlands, crude singing echoed, the lyrics completely distorted by the warriors' group members, filled with lewd words. Vargo Hoat rode at the front, leading the singing with his hoarse voice. Although the wound on his ear still throbbed and his head felt heavy, the spoils from raiding the farm and the enormous ransom he was about to receive put him in a good mood. The air was filled with a joyful atmosphere. Next to everyone's saddles hung stolen goods and some silver, proving that during their pursuit of the Kingslayer, they had acquired quite a few unexpected trophies. To them, war was not suffering, but a feast bestowed by the gods. Behind them, the noisy singing reached Jaime Lannister's ears. He, who had been hanging his head, couldn't help but look up slightly and mock. If Robert Baratheon were still alive, he'd surely get along with these fellows. That king, so fat he could barely get on a horse, always liked to sing this song after whoring or getting drunk. His voice was low, yet always carried a hint of cynical mockery. Even after having a hand cut off, his past pride and honor trampled in the mud like garbage and stray dogs, and even being tricked into drinking a pot of horse urine, he still hadn't broken the habit of speaking that way. Hearing this, Brienne frowned. Although captured, she still adhered to her knightly ideals at all times, and any mockery of the deceased king made her uncomfortable. His Majesty Robert was a mighty warrior. Brienne stiffly defended. He defeated Prince Rhaegar Targaryen in single combat and won the war. Hey, if I hadn't killed the Mad King back then, all he would have gotten was a ruin. Jaime instinctively curled his lip in disdain at this argument. Seeing Brienne cast a questioning gaze his way, he first paused, then quickly changed the subject, mocking. A king, yet his end was being drunk and disemboweled by a wild boar in the forest. How ironic, isn't it? Just like us, the noble Kingsguard and the Maid of Tarth, now captives of these scumbags. We are in this situation because we were outnumbered, which is not shameful, Kingslayer. Yes, outnumbered. Jaime mused thoughtfully. Back then, old Barristan, alone, could charge into 10,000 enemy troops and cut off Savage Maris's head. If my sword skills and bones haven't rusted from being locked in Harrenhal for too long, these fellows, even if they all came at me together, wouldn't be my match. He gritted his teeth, his eyes filled with resentment. As the youngest Kingsguard in history, Jaime's excellence had never wavered. Hearing this, Brienne wanted to retort, but her gaze fell upon his hand, which had been cut off because he spoke up to save her, and she swallowed the words on her tongue. She took a deep breath, her gaze involuntarily drawn to the front of the procession, to the seemingly calm figure on horseback. You shouldn't have cooperated with him. That fellow named Corleone, He could have been an innocent, but now he's helping the wicked, betraying his farm and his lord. Traitors are not to be trusted. Trust. Hearing this, Jaime chuckled. Here, trust is rarer than Valyrian steel, my lady. Don't forget, you're sitting behind a Kingslayer. But as he spoke, he turned his head slightly, his gaze flicking forward. I don't need to trust him. I just need to know what he wants, and I'm very sure what he wants is more than just staying alive. This morning, that fellow just standing there looked more like a lion than any Lannister. He even reminded me of. Jaime was about to say, my father, but before he could, their hushed conversation caught Ygotte's attention from the front. He rode over and shouted, shut your mouth, no talking, and you, cow, unless you want to taste being dragged by a horse. As his words fell, before Jaime could react, Ygotте unceremoniously slammed the end of his sword sheath into Jaime's ribs. Ah! Jaime grunted, his body curling in pain, but he gritted his teeth and made no further sound. Brienne glared, but before she could speak, a voice beat her to it. Hey! Go easy, you Dothraki savage. It was Uswick. He rode over, rudely bumping Ygotte's horse aside, and shouted, don't break him. Neither the king in the north nor Lord Tywin Lannister wants a dead Kingslayer, they want a lively one, that's a lot of gold dragons. Ygotте coldly glanced at Uswick, his hand on his sword hilt, and straightforwardly said, then please keep an eye on the captives, don't let them keep thinking about escaping. If the gold dragons run off, I'll cut out your tongue and feed it to the horses. The words were full of provocation, and Uswick's face instantly darkened, his hand reaching for his waist. What do you mean, Ygotte, looking for trouble? At these words, the warriors' group members quickly gathered, dividing into two factions around them. As Corleone expected, behind Uswick were Rorger, Fang, and other new recruits, while around Ygotte were 7 or 8 of the older warriors' group members. The atmosphere instantly became tense. All of you shut the hell up. From the front came Vargo Hoat's roar. He reined in his zebra, turned around, and his bloodshot eyes, from a hangover and fever, glared fiercely at the two groups, threatening unceremoniously, all of you keep moving. Whoever dares to fight amongst yourselves again, I'll cut out his tongue first and have it with my drink. He had long noticed signs of the warriors group's division in Uswick's ambition. But Vargo knew that the primary goal now was to return safely to Harrenhal, and he didn't want any further complications on the road. Hearing the commander's reprimand, Ygotte snorted, no longer paying attention to the livid Uswick. He spurred his horse forward, returning to his position between Corleone and Vargo, looking utterly loyal. Uswick, however, stared menacingly at Vargo's swaying back, licked his lips, and felt an uncontrollable urgency in his heart. But in the end, he maintained his rationality and did not pursue the matter further. The two groups quickly dispersed and continued their journey. Looking at Jaime, who was hanging his head beside her, Brienne asked with some concern, are you all right? However, Jaime slowly raised his head, his eyes devoid of anger or pain. Amidst his dirty hair, those emerald eyes burned with a light she hadn't seen in a long time. He grinned, revealing a wild, savage smile. All right. I'm better than all right now, my dear Brienne. Brienne froze. Jaime, however, didn't explain, but instead flexed his remaining left wrist, subtly slipping a small, curved dagger into his sleeve. The cold metallic touch was like a spring breeze, awakening the sleeping lion within him. Subconsciously, Jaime's gaze swept forward. Is that you, Vito Corleone? He thought to himself, feeling his guess was too outlandish. The other party was clearly just a low-status farmer, barely surviving on his medical skills. However, Jaime couldn't find any other reason to explain why that Dothraki would help him in plain sight. And just as he looked up, Jaime's heart suddenly leapt. He saw Corleone in front, who had, at some point, turned sideways and was calmly watching him. Those unfathomably deep dark eyes seemed to have already seen the turmoil in his heart. Then, his right hand gently raised, a finger placed on his lips. As if saying, shish. Then, under Jaime's gaze, the other party, sitting on the back of his inferior horse, bowed slightly with extreme elegance. The movement was as fleeting as an illusion. Even before Jaime could react, Corleone turned his head back as if nothing had happened, continuing to sway gently with the rhythm of the procession. His back once again became ordinary and silent, as if that fleeting glance had never existed. Jamie tightly gripped the dagger in his hand, his knuckles white from the force. Recalling Corleone's posture just now, that demeanor, that bearing, was even more composed than any hand of the king or noble he had ever seen. Indeed. Vito Corleone. Jamie excitedly took a deep breath, sighing in his heart, compared to those useless Lannisters in the family, you are more like a true lion. The riverlands in autumn were always muddy. Even though the sun had dispersed the thick morning fog, sloppy mud still covered the river road, making every step the horses took heavy. Just as the sun reached its zenith, the wheel of a carriage loaded with stolen loot sank deeply into the mire, forcing the entire troop to halt once again. Taking advantage of this opportunity, Corleone began changing Vargo Hote's bandages under the supervision of two warriors group members. Vargo was slumped between two trees, one was an oak, and the other was also an oak. The troop grew sluggish in the afternoon. Down the road, Uswick was shouting loudly at his subordinates, trying to lift the wheel out of the mud. The work chants sounded weak in the damp air. Listening to this sound, Vargo suddenly shivered, and the feeling of dizziness grew stronger. He felt more clearly than ever that something inside him was slipping away uncontrollably, like quicksand, through his fingers. This sense of powerlessness terrified him even more than facing a sword. Zorro. Vargo roared hoarsely at his confidant. Go tell them to move faster, and stop acting like whores who've taken 20 customers in a row, their legs too weak to stand. He instinctively longed to return behind the sturdy walls of Harrenhal as quickly as possible. Only under Qyburn's treatment could he feel a shred of safety. The fat man named Zorro took the order and left, leaving only Yigo and Corleone beside him. Vargo's bloodshot eyes stared straight at Corleone. He lowered his voice, his tone laced with uncontrollable irritability. Why do I feel worse? How is my wound, doctor? The healing is far from ideal, my lord. Corleone deftly unwrapped the bandage, the edges of which were already soaked with a layer of yellowish-green fluid. But he did not hide the truth, answering professionally and honestly. There are severe symptoms of infection, much fiercer than anticipated. You quack. Vargo exploded in anger, leaning forward in agitation, grabbing Corleone's collar and demanding, did you even try to treat me properly? Hearing this, Corleone displayed a look of appropriate exhaustion and a hint of grievance. My lord, I swear by the seven, I have done my utmost. But you forcibly pushed the necrotic tissue back in and drank alcohol while suffering from a high fever. That is absolutely an active embrace of the stranger. All I can do now is merely slow down the process of infection in your wound. Slow down. You swore you could cure me back then. Vargo sneered, the murderous intent in his eyes instantly replacing his doubt. He suddenly pointed at Corleone and roared at Yigo, I've had enough. Kill this quack. Now. The silent Yigo did not hesitate in the slightest, deftly drawing the longsword Vargo had gifted him. He stepped forward, subtly positioning his body between Corleone and Vargo. Boss. Just then, Uswick's voice sounded in time. He had been watching the commotion. Seeing Vargo draw his sword, he immediately abandoned his comrades who were pushing the cart and hurried over, his face plastered with a false smile of concern. How are you feeling? You look terrible. Should you rest a little longer? However, Vargo completely ignored his greeting, only repeating the command, kill him, Yigo. Yigo raised his arm, but Uswick once again stepped forward, blocking the space between him and Corleone, earnestly pleading, don't, boss. Your wound still needs a doctor's care. Even if this fellow isn't very good, he's much better than us laymen. If you kill him now, what will happen if your condition worsens on the road? Saying this, he leaned close to Vargo, pretending to whisper in his ear, if you ask me, we should wait until we reach Harrenhal and Maester Qyburn takes over. It won't be too late to skin him then. Uswick spoke very sincerely, as if he truly had Vargo, the leader, in his best interest. However, his words immediately aroused Vargo's suspicion, and his gaze flickered back and forth between Corleone and Uswick, full of doubt and surprise. Uswick, who was always cruel, was actively and eagerly defending this quack. Coupled with the dizziness from the high fever, a surge of furious betrayal instantly rushed to his head. How much longer will the carriage take? Suppressing the urge to kill, Vargo gritted his teeth and asked in a low voice. Hearing this, Uswick showed a troubled expression and shook his head. Alas, it's stuck too deep. The mud is sucking the wheel tighter than that old maid from Tarth. It will probably take a while longer, maybe not even before dark. Then what the hell are you standing here for? Vargo sharply interrupted, reprimanding him mercilessly. Now go help. Do you want us to spend the winter in this miserable forest? Uswick froze momentarily at the words, tightened his grip on the sword in his right hand, and then grinned. I'm going now, boss. Unable to linger, he reluctantly turned and departed, giving Corleone a deep, veiled look that held the meaning of, you'd better watch your back. Corleone subtly nodded without changing his expression, an action that Vargo just happened to see clearly. He was instantly certain. This fooled quack must have colluded with Uswick. What did they want to do? Vargo narrowed his eyes slightly, a cold curve appearing at the corner of his mouth, as if what had just happened was merely a misunderstanding. So, Doctor. His voice was low as he questioned Corleone again. Given my current condition, what, in your opinion, is the best course of action? My suggestion, my lord. Corleone showed no fear, meeting Vargo's gaze sincerely and giving an answer he hadn't expected. You should abandon the slow main force, take only me and Yigo, and ride hard back to Harrenhal. The infection and fever are developing too fast. We must hurry. Perhaps we can still get more professional treatment and bring it under control before the situation completely deteriorates. Hearing this, Vargo did not speak immediately, instead examining Corleone with icy eyes. He had expected the other man to agree with Uswick's suggestion and continue delaying, but instead, was this a move to isolate him? And then split the spoils they had gathered on the road with Uswick. Ha ha, what a bunch of short-sighted fools. Vargo sneered internally. They didn't even have the courage to start a rebellion, only thinking about immediate profit. He became increasingly certain that this was a conspiracy. However, he couldn't just chop Corleone down. That would be tantamount to immediately breaking ties with Uswick, and the risk of forcing his opponent into a corner would be too great. An idea gradually formed in Vargo's mind. He stopped looking at Corleone, as if the man were already dead, and simply waved his hand, saying coldly, it seems your medical skills have reached their limit. Get lost. Don't hover in front of me. Saying this, Vargo pointed toward the two captives. Perhaps you can use your mediocre skills to look at the Kingslayer's wounds. Of course, if you happen to kill him. Ha! Hearing this, Corleone quietly packed up his medical tools and stood up, his expression hesitant, as if he wanted to speak but stopped himself. However, he remained silent. Under Yigo's watchful gaze, he turned and walked toward Jamie and Brienne. The shadow of the leaves obscured half his face, hiding his expression, and preventing anyone from seeing the slight upward curve of his lips. Good advice is wasted on a doomed man. As a professional doctor, he had given Vargo Hoth the best possible advice, but if the patient refused to listen, there was nothing he could do. After all, the doctor-patient relationship has always been difficult to manage, and Westeros was no exception. Under the oak tree, Vargo stared intently at Corleone's retreating back, a cold glint flashing in his eyes. After pondering for a moment, he turned to Yigo, motioned for him to lean closer, and whispered, keep a close eye on that quack, and also quietly inform Zoro, Timon, and Pug that tonight, they should find a chance to directly kill Uswick and those three newcomers. Corleone walked toward the edge of the camp, carrying his medical bag, and was immediately and warily stopped by two members of the warriors' group standing guard. This is Captain Vague's order. Before the two men could question him, Corleone raised his head, adopting a proud demeanor, and spoke with borrowed authority, I am here to treat the Kingslayer's wounds. If he dies on the way to Harrenhal, none of you will get a single gold dragon. Hearing this, the two guards exchanged glances and reluctantly stepped aside, their eyes fixed on Corleone with annoyance. What's a farmer got to be so cocky about? If it weren't for Captain Vague's order, I'd kill you right now. Under their watchful eyes, Corleone swaggered over to Jamie, squatted down, and began unwrapping the bandages to treat the bloody, mangled stump. The treatment has worked, at least the rot hasn't spread too much further, but the necrotic tissue must be surgically removed as soon as possible, or you might lose the entire arm. His voice was neither too loud nor too soft, just enough for the two guards to hear clearly, and his tone was professional, giving the impression he was strictly conducting business. Jamie lowered his head, his voice tinged with deliberate exhaustion. What good is saving it? Will it let me hold a sword again and swing it like before? As he spoke, he raised his eyelids, and a flicker of inquiry crossed his green eyes. Corleone worked quickly, saying pointedly, at least a clean wound won't leave you burning with fever at midnight, dying before you even make it to dawn. At this, Jaime's green eyes narrowed slightly. He vaguely guessed that Corleone might be reminding him that the time to act was at night. However, he did not respond immediately, but sneered again, speaking with a hint of scrutiny and mockery. Even if you heal my wounds, I won't thank you, lad. And perhaps the moment my father pays the ransom, I will immediately demand that Roose Bolton chop off your head. The gold of Castley Rock might not allow me to avenge my lost hand, but it's enough to buy off an insignificant farmer physician like you, just to vent my anger. Let me guess, how many dragons would it take for the Lord of the Dreadfort to agree? 500. 1,000. Hearing Jaime's mockery, Corleone's hands did not stop working. This fellow was clearly warning him that cooperating with him might not end well. However, Corleone understood Jaime's character perfectly, perhaps even better than his father, Lord Tywin. He raised his eyes, meeting Jaime's probing and mocking gaze calmly, his voice soft but carrying a strange certainty. A lion may be forced by circumstances to roll in the mud, dirtying its golden fur. It might have to kill intruders to protect its den, or even shoulder blame to prevent a far worse catastrophe. But I have never heard of a proud lion willingly breaking an oath it swore. If such a day ever came, it would certainly not be due to the lion's own baseness or greed. It must be because it faces a nobler choice, one that forces its hand, a choice even more important than its own honor. At these words, Jaime was completely stunned. Corleone's words were like an impossibly precise scalpel, slicing straight through the heaviest scar Jaime carried, the one he least wanted touched. For years, the name, Kingslayer, had spread throughout all of Westeros, yet no one had ever interpreted his actions back then from this perspective, not even Eddard Stark, who was renowned for his justice and honor. He understands me. He truly understands me. An unspeakable wave of bitterness and solace instantly shattered the high wall of anger, humiliation, and self-pity that Jaime had built up in his heart. He stared blankly at the humble farmer physician before him, opened his mouth, but could not utter a single word. Seeing Jaime stunned, Brienne, standing nearby, was completely baffled. With her simple thought process, she had only heard the two men discussing strange topics about wounds and lions, but she could not connect them to anything practical. Not only her, but the two guards nearby were also confused, completely failing to grasp any deeper meaning in their conversation. Just then, Uswick's roar came from nearby, breaking the momentary silence. Hey, you two, Timon, Pug. Are you bloody blind? Can't you see everyone is exhausted as if they'd shagged an entire whorehouse? Get your asses over here and push the cart. The two guards were startled by the shouting and replied awkwardly, but, the Kingslayer and this woman. I'll watch them for you. Uswick, whose clothes were spotless, swore loudly and strode over, a bunch of useless sods. This warriors group is doomed without me. Seeing his angry expression, the two men dared not say more and hurried toward the carriage stuck in the mud. Taking the place of the guards, Uswick crossed his arms and cast a gloomy look over Corleone and Jaime. Suddenly, without warning, he lifted his foot and kicked Corleone in the shoulder, sending him staggering. Stop dawdling. Get over here. I cut my hand pushing the cart just now, take a good look at it. With that, he walked over to a tree and sat down. After neatly bandaging Jaime, Corleone raised an eyebrow at him, pointedly glancing toward Uswick, and said in a low voice, Tonight, Sir Jaime. Remember to remind me to change your dressing. Corleone picked up his medical bag and walked toward Uswick, who was sitting under the tree. There was no sign of anger on his face from being kicked. He calmly walked up to Uswick, squatted down, opened the medical bag, and took out a clean cloth and a waterskin, acting as if he truly meant to treat a non-existent wound. Your treatment seems to have had some effect. That fellow is swaying badly on his horse. Uswick scanned his surroundings warily, his voice extremely low, his lips barely moving. But it's not enough. It would be best if he went to meet the stranger before dawn. He sounded very urgent. Corleone moistened the cloth and wiped Uswick's smooth, clean palm, saying softly, he no longer trusts me. Just now, He ordered that Dothraki man to slit my throat. I can't get near him, let alone tamper with anything else. Uswick cursed, frowned, and ordered fiercely, figure something out. Before dawn, find one last chance to try, even if it means putting something in that fellow's waterskin or food. If that absolutely fails. A flash of ruthlessness appeared in his eyes, and he finally gritted his teeth. We'll move early then, we can't wait any longer. Vague absolutely cannot be allowed to return to Harrenhal alive. Uswick analyzed the situation to himself, and seeing Corleone silent, he assumed the other man agreed with his suggestion. He thought for a moment, glanced at Yigo, who was guarding Vague, and curled his lips into a cruel smile. Once the fighting starts, you need to find a way to get close and kill that Dothraki savage. He is Vague's most loyal dog, and he must be dealt with first. Me. Kill him. Hearing this, Corleone pointed to his own nose, looking utterly incredulous. What the hell are you talking about? That man's arms are thicker than my thighs. What? You don't want to? Seeing Corleone's strong reaction, Uswick sneered. Since you took 10 gold dragons from me, you need to prove your worth, otherwise. I'll kill you right now. Hey. Seeing Uswick's aggressive stance, Corleone sneered inwardly. This fellow certainly knew how to calculate things. He was clearly being sent on a near-suicidal mission, but regardless of success or failure, Uswick could easily eliminate two potential obstacles, Yigo and himself. Yet Corleone showed no emotion, even furrowing his brow slightly to display the appropriate amount of difficulty, and replied softly, Since you've decided, I can try, but please lend me a hand when the moment is critical. Corleone's obedience greatly satisfied Uswick, and a twisted smile appeared on his grim face. He suddenly pulled his hand away and deliberately shouted, Get lost. You clumsy fool, you can't even treat a tiny scratch properly. Corleone silently packed his things, stood up, and left. However, Uswick, who was gloating with a sneer, failed to notice that not far away, his captain was staring intently at him with an extremely dangerous gaze. Clearly, the entire interaction between the two men had been witnessed by the captain. Thanks to Uswick, the carriage stuck in the mud remained immobile until sundown. Night fell, and the warriors' group had to set up camp alongside the muddy Riverland's main road. The bonfire crackled loudly, and the air was filled with a mixture of cheap ale, burnt meat, and sweat. Vargo Hoat leaned crookedly against a twisted tree slightly away from the fire, sitting on a stolen blanket, his face flushed with a sickly red hue in the flickering firelight. His cloudy eyes swept over his noisy subordinates, lingering for a moment on Uswick's face, which was plastered with a false smile, before passing over Yigo, who stood silently guarding him. Have you informed everyone? I have already told Zoro and the other two that as soon as they hear the shout, Long live the warriors group, they are to immediately act and kill Uswick and his men. Yigo first nodded, then replied straightforwardly, I didn't tell the others, they cannot be trusted. Seeing how thorough he was, Vague smiled contentedly, you are still the most trustworthy. Don't worry, once we deal with the trouble along this road and return to Harrenhal, you will be the second in command. Everything I have, you will have. After this grand promise, he was met only with silence from Yigo. Vague immediately felt a bit awkward. The Dothraki was good in every way, except that he wouldn't flatter. Although having such a subordinate was highly reliable, Vague always felt that something was missing. Take Uswick, for example. If Vague said something like that to him, the other man would definitely launch into a torrent of compliments, such as, Boss, my respect for you is as endless as the Blackwater River, or, it's like the Green Fork overflowing, unstoppable. But then again, if Yigo really acted that way, Vague wouldn't trust him as much. It was a case of having to take the bad with the good. The noise around the bonfire seemed to intensify. A group of warriors group members were happily eating and drinking, and even a few fringe members were already drunk and starting to sing. Uswick laughed as he clinked cups with the man next to him, but the corner of his eye was constantly watching Vague's direction. Seeing Vague and Yigo whispering, although he couldn't hear what they were saying, his heart skipped a beat, and he instinctively sensed something. He couldn't wait any longer. He took a small sip of the wine stolen from the farm, then secretly spat it out when no one was looking. Then, without changing his expression, he winked at Rorger, who was on the edge of the crowd. Rorger understood, staggering through the crowd, heading straight for Corleone, a fringe member of the group who was not qualified to join the feast and was leaning seemingly idly against a tree trunk in the corner. He unbuckled his belt as he walked, seemingly intending to urinate, but as he passed Corleone, he deliberately bumped into him. Clumsy fool, watch where you're going. Rorger bellowed gruffly, his steps faltering as if he were heavily drunk. However, at the moment their bodies touched, he very discreetly slipped a short dagger into Corleone's hand. Hold this. He leaned into Corleone's ear, his previously drunken tone instantly clear. Later, as soon as you hear someone shout, "Long live the warriors group," immediately find a chance to get close to that Dothraki savage and kill him. Feeling the cold metal against his palm, Corleone was visibly stunned, even wondering if he had misheard. Long live the warriors group. Your leader and second in command seem to have quite the understanding, don't they? However, he maintained a poker face, quickly sliding the dagger into the wide cuff of his worn jacket to hide it, forcing out a slightly frightened smile. When the time comes, please keep an eye on me, Lord Rorger. I might not be a match for that fellow. The Seven will protect you, boy. Rorger snorted coldly. Perhaps because Corleone was already being treated as disposable, his attitude was much worse than before. He pretended to pat Corleone's shoulder, then reverted to his drunken posture, staggering away and blending into the noisy crowd. The bonfire burned brighter. The alcohol began to take effect, the singing grew absurd and strange, and vulgar jokes rose and fell. The main members of both factions, however, had barely drunk anything, each harboring their own schemes, carefully observing the expressions of others. The air was thick with a false sense of merriment. Vague felt the strength being slowly drained from his body by the fever, and he decided to make one last attempt. Uswick. The voice was not loud, but it captured everyone's attention. Uswick's laughter abruptly stopped. He turned his head, met Vague's gaze, and his false smile stiffened momentarily before becoming even brighter. He put down his cup and waved, signaling his men to continue, then slowly got up, his hand resting seemingly casually on the hilt of the sword at his waist, and walked over. Boss, what are your orders? Seeing that the other man was highly alert, Vague didn't blame him for anything, only raising his hand to point at the bare old oak tree on the perimeter. Let's talk over there. It's quieter. Hearing this, Uswick's eyes flickered. He glanced at Yigo, then swept over the noisy crowd that was subtly divided into two factions, and finally nodded, all right, boss. He pretended to stagger as he followed Vague toward the corner shrouded in darkness. Yigo tried to follow but was stopped by Vague's raised hand. Away from the bonfire's noise, the cold night wind made Vague shiver again. He pulled his cloak tighter around himself, looking somewhat worn out. He leaned against the rough bark of the bare tree trunk, breathing heavily. Uswick stopped a few steps in front of him, arms crossed, wearing that nauseatingly concerned smile, though his eyes were full of amusement. He seemed to be calculating the probability of successfully killing Vague if he acted now. After thinking it over, he still didn't dare to make a move. Having been the leader of the warriors group for over a decade, guiding this group of vicious men, Vargo Hote's swordsmanship was universally acknowledged as strong. Even though Vague was currently weak, Uswick was still not confident he could win in a one-on-one duel. Uswick. After resting for a moment, Vague finally spoke. His voice was hoarse and weary, yet sounded extremely sincere. Do you remember? On the stepstones, we ran into a storm and almost fed ourselves to the sharks. And later, in Kohor, when we were stealing that ship of silk, you took an arrow for me and almost died. Hearing this, the smile on Uswick's face slightly faded, as if some distant memory had been stirred. But he didn't speak, just listened quietly. We fought our way here together from Essos, my brother. Vague's voice dropped, tinged with melancholy. What was it all for? Wasn't it just so we could get a foothold in Westeros, a place to settle down? And now we finally have it. Harrenhal. Although Roose Bolton appointed me as the Earl, I never considered it mine alone. It was the result of everyone's combined effort. Saying this, Vague paused slightly, observing Uswick's reaction. Boss. You actually still remember those things. The other man was silent at first, then immediately stepped half a pace forward, habitually beginning to perform his loyalty. Taking an arrow for you was only right. Without your leadership, all of us brothers would have rotted in the gutters of the free cities long ago. To be honest, boss, my respect for you is as endless as the Blackwater River, and it's like the Green Fork overflowing, unstoppable. Stop the nonsense. Watching his exaggerated performance, it was Vague's turn to be speechless. Seeing that this fellow was still putting on an act in front of him, Vague took a deep breath and said in a low voice, "The king in the north is victorious again and again. Now, most of the Riverlands is in his hands. The scales of war have tipped toward the north, and our choice was not wrong. But Roose Bolton, that flayer, do you really believe he will sincerely allow us to sit comfortably as earls in Harrenhal? I noticed long ago that he is in close contact with Tywin Lannister. If I die." He stared intensely at Uswick and demanded, "How long do you think the warriors group will last? Bolton will probably immediately push you all out to appease the Lannister fury." As Vague spoke, Uswick's brow furrowed. He had to admit that Vague saw things quite clearly. In that case, could he only use the Kingslayer as a token of allegiance to seek refuge with Tywin Lannister? Just as Corleone said, Vargo Hoat was the one who chopped off the Kingslayer's right hand. What did that have to do with Uswick? But then again, if the king in the north truly won the war, would the title of Earl of Harrenhal still fall to him? Internally calculating everything and weighing the pros and cons, Uswick's firm intention to act tonight wavered slightly without him realizing it. Vague keenly caught the change in his expression and immediately threw out the final bait. "Don't be foolish, my old friend. As long as I can return to Harrenhal, that fooled castle is still ours. Money, women, power, everything I have, you will have. Harrenhal." Uswick whispered the word again, his eyes flashing wildly with greedy light. That was the largest castle in the Seven Kingdoms, the kind you wouldn't trade even for a dukedom. After thinking for a long time, the smile returned to his face. Vague was right. Even if Uswick killed Vague on the road, Roose Bolton would not give him the position of Earl. As for defecting to Tywin, he couldn't be sure whether the Kingslayer, who had lost a hand, would talk nonsense to his Duke father once he returned to King's Landing. He dared not gamble. After a long period of contemplation, the smile returned to Uswick's face. "Just as I said. Boss, my respect for you is as endless as the Blackwater River. How could the warriors group possibly succeed without your leadership?" He spoke very sincerely and extended an arm toward Vague. Seeing this, Vague also sighed in relief and smiled happily. To be able to resolve an impending rebellion without resorting to violence, minimizing potential losses. He truly was a brilliant leader. Vague reached out and firmly grasped Uswick's arm, symbolizing the imminent reconciliation between the leader and the second in command of the warriors group. But just as he prepared to pat Uswick on the shoulder and suggest they return to the bonfire for a drink, a heart-rending shout suddenly erupted from the crowd not far away. "Long live the warriors group! Time returned to 5 minutes ago." Corleone leaned against the rough tree trunk, shadows engulfing most of him. The sharp perception brought by Insight LV1 allowed him to roughly observe everything happening nearby. Seeing Uswick called away by Vague, Corleone, leaning against the tree, immediately sensed something was up. He never underestimated anyone. As Corleone himself said, women and children could be careless, but men could not. In this world where human life was cheaper than grass, a single mistake could lead to death. Therefore, every word, action, and movement had to be handled with extreme caution. He had originally thought Vague wouldn't be able to resist moving against the traitor immediately, but it now seemed the other party was not entirely foolish. After pondering for a moment, he took a deep breath and steadily walked out of the shadows. Waiting passively, surrendering his fate. That was what only an idiot would do. If there was no opportunity, then, he would actively create one. Plan B, initiating. With his steps, the cowardice and timidity belonging to a farmer had faded from Corleone's face, replaced by an unparalleled calmness. He walked directly toward the fat man, Zorro, who was gnawing on roasted meat by the bonfire, and stretched out his hand. "Give me a roasted lamb leg." His voice was not loud, but it sounded completely justified. Zorro raised his head, his greasy, fat face showing a moment of shock, as if he suspected he had misheard something. He recognized this farmer doctor who had survived by luck. The leader's injury required his treatment, but that did not mean the man could push his luck. Seeing Corleone's serious face, Zorro let out an undisguised, contemptuous sneer. "That lamb leg is reserved for Commander Vague, kid. Saying this, he casually picked up the half-roasted, charred sheep's head with little meat on it from the nearby grill and tossed it at Corleone's feet. Only this. Take it and scram. However, Corleone didn't even look at the half-sheep's head. His gaze locked onto Zorro's face, and he raised his voice slightly, repeating, "I want a roasted lamb leg." This provocative tone immediately drew the attention of several nearby Warriors group members. They stopped talking and looked over with interest. A lowly farmer dared to provoke Zorro. What madness was this? Sure enough, Corleone's aggressive attitude instantly enraged Zorro. He sprang to his feet, his right hand reaching for his sword hilt. "Are you fooling looking for death? I'll say it one last time, only the sheep's head. If you talk back again, I'll chop you up and roast you for a drink." Spit nearly sprayed onto Corleone's face. However, to everyone's surprise, the farmer did not retreat. Instead, he met the man's aggression with his own, stating firmly, "I am eating a lamb leg today." Zorro was completely provoked and immediately moved to teach this insolent fellow a lesson. However, an even faster dark figure darted out from the side and behind. Bang! A boot-clad foot kicked Corleone in the waist, sending him sprawling heavily into the mud. It was Yigo. "I've tolerated you for too long, quack." The muscular Dothraki warrior stood between Corleone and Zorro, his face full of rage, and cursed. "You never properly treated Commander Vague's injury. He's infected and feverish now, and it's all because of you, you fooled quack. And now you want to steal the commander's lamb leg. I'll kill you." In full view of everyone, Yigo drew the fine steel longsword Vague had gifted him and prepared to strike. This sudden turn of events stunned Zorro. "Wait, I was the one being provoked. Why are you reacting so violently? Don't be rash, Yigo." Although Zorro was also displeased, he still retained some rationality. Seeing that Yigo was genuinely about to strike, he instinctively took a step forward, reaching out to stop him. "The commander's injury still needs this kid too." His voice abruptly cut off. Because Yigo's longsword, which appeared to be aimed at Corleone, suddenly changed direction mid-swing, plunging directly into Zorro's unguarded throat. Ah! Zorro's eyes instantly widened, filled with extreme bewilderment. He wanted to speak, but his throat could not produce any sound. He could only stare incredulously at Yigo, completely unable to understand why that sword had landed on him. Yigo's face was expressionless. He twisted his wrist and violently pulled out the longsword. Warm blood spurted from Zorro's throat, and his body immediately collapsed powerlessly. Everything happened too quickly for anyone to react. All singing, laughter, and clinking of cups ceased. Everyone stared dumbfounded at the scene. Why had Yigo, the commander's most trusted personal guard, suddenly killed Zorro, the commander's confidant? Yet, in the midst of this dead silence, Yigo raised the dripping longsword, using all his strength to let out the roar that was destined to ignite the entire night. Long live the Warriors group. The shout echoed through the woods, like a spark tossed into gunpowder. Rorger and Fang were the first to react, their faces instantly erupting in ecstasy. It succeeded. By the seven gods, even the strongest Yigo had been turned. The deputy commander truly was a full genius. The advantage is ours. On the other side, the veterans of the Warriors group, Timon, Pug, Tog Yosh, and others Vague had secretly informed, were utterly confused. The slogan was right, but why did Yigo attack and kill one of their own? Had the plan changed, or? They had no time to ponder this, because the moment Yigo's shout faded, Rorger, Fang, and the others, led by Yigo, had already drawn their weapons and were charging toward them. The instinct for survival made the men hastily draw their swords to fight back. Clang! The sound of metal clashing completely shattered the facade of peace maintained by the Warriors group. Those Warriors group members who were originally neutral and oblivious were now completely bewildered. They're fighting. Why? Although they didn't know exactly what was happening, Yigo had shouted, "Long live the Warriors group." Moreover, he was the commander's most trusted personal guard. Since he had drawn his sword, it must mean that Timon, Pug, and their group were the traitors. Follow Yigo. Kill the traitors. More men shouted and joined the fray. The melee spread like a plague, and in the chaos, blind obedience became the mainstream. They couldn't even distinguish who the traitors were. They simply relied on instinct, following the steps of the strongest warrior, slashing their weapons at anyone nearby who looked suspicious or was merely a beat too slow. The camp completely transformed into a battlefield. The wails of men, angry roars, and the clash of weapons wove together into a symphony of death. Firelight flickered, illuminating twisted, frenzied faces, as warm blood splattered everywhere. Meanwhile, beneath an oak tree far from the bonfire. When the 5 words, "Long live the warriors" group, reached them, Vargo Hoat and Uswick simultaneously stiffened. The false smiles they had just managed to plaster onto their faces instantly melted away, replaced by the fury of betrayal. You fool! Vague's face turned ashen. He instinctively reached for the sword at his waist, but his movement was half a beat slow due to his weakness. You dog fool! Uswick, who had remained vigilant, reacted even faster. The moment he heard the slogan, he concluded that Vague had been deceiving him and intended to strike first. He roared in anger. His hand, which had been resting on the sword hilt, suddenly exerted force, and the longsword shot out of its sheath, stabbing straight toward Vague's heart. Vague, truly a warrior capable of conquering even the Dothraki, reacted incredibly fast. He quickly threw himself backward, narrowly dodging the fatal blow. Although he looked somewhat disheveled, the sword tip only managed to slash his leather armor across the chest. Traitor! Vague shrieked, finally pulling out his own sword, a heavy broadsword. Though not as fine as the one he gave Yigo, it was excellent for hacking. The 2 men engaged in a desperate fight to the death in the dark clearing. Sword light flashed and figures intertwined. Every clash was fought with full effort. Vague still possessed strength and experience, but the high fever had drained his stamina, making his movements sluggish and weak. He gasped for air, each breath pulling at his lungs with a sharp, stinging pain. Sweat mixed with blood streamed down his forehead, blurring his vision, and the broadsword in his hand felt as heavy as 1,000 pounds. Uswick, however, was like a slippery eel, never meeting him head-on. He simply used his familiarity with Vague's sword patterns to continuously dodge and skirmish, draining his opponent's already limited energy. Is that all you've got, Vargo Hoat? Uswick had a bloody cut on his face, but his eyes were increasingly excited as he mocked. Where's the prestige of your Lord of Harrenhal? Show me, come on. As he spoke, he spotted the moment Vague was exhausted after a heavy chop, ducked low, rushed forward, and slammed his shoulder hard into the man's chest. Ah! Vague groaned. His already unsteady stance immediately failed him, and he stumbled backward, falling. He could no longer hold the broadsword, which flew out of his grasp and landed in the mud a few steps away. Seeing this, Uswick excitedly lunged forward, but he didn't expect his opponent to take advantage of the fall, kicking him squarely on the wrist and sending his longsword flying as well. Seizing the opportunity, Vague violently flipped over, pinning Uswick beneath him. He grabbed Uswick's throat with both hands, then lowered his head, opened his mouth to reveal his yellowed, dark teeth, and viciously bit Uswick's face. Ah! Uswick let out a heart-wrenching scream, as a piece of flesh was ripped off. The intense pain triggered his savagery. He curled his fingers and fiercely gouged Vague's ear wound, which was already festering and oozing pus. PFF'd. Foul-smelling pus and rotten flesh were dug out. Vague let out a howl even more miserable than Uswick's, his entire body convulsing from the nerve-shattering pain. On the muddy ground, the 2 highest-ranking men of the once arrogant warriors group were now fighting like beasts, competing for mating rights, struggling for the right to survive in the most primal and hideous way possible. Swordsmanship, honor, and dignity were all gone, leaving nothing but naked instinct. And at this moment, the instigator of all this had unknowingly climbed a crooked-necked tree, quietly enjoying the chaotic scene below, smiling contentedly. Hey, picking apples for over a decade finally came in handy. Thanks for watching.